Wayne, Ken, Andy. That's all right. Putting that, you guys are here for the record. We do have a quorum. We just may not. So now that we do have everybody sitting down for the most part, I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That has been approved. Item number 3, public comment for items not on the agenda. Sir, come on up. I see the name of Rick. So Rick can tell us his last name. Oh, when you get up there. Yes.
Better do it than the CAC. My name is Rick Hoover. I'm a member of the CAC at large. I just wanted to mention that 17 years ago today, we made a commitment, or most of us did, I'm sure we all did, that we'd never forget. I would hope that maybe today we'll recommit ourselves to that we will never forget. Thank you.
Is there anybody else who would like to have a public comment?
Jolene Hausman, Fountain Valley Senior Center. The Fountain Valley Senior Center, Invita, and Silver Key would just like to once again thank Travis and Andy on behalf of PPACG in working towards some very good solutions for the specialized transit in our region, and we're excited to still collaborate and work towards those solutions.
Thank you, and Travis, thank you. Any other comments? Item number 4, approval of the minutes from the August 7, 2019 meeting.
Move approval. Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. That carries. Item number 5A, monthly financial reports. Any comment on, oh, here she comes. Here she comes.
Good afternoon. Okay, good afternoon. So the July sales and use tax figure that we received today is $10,206,000. And compared to the monthly budget, we're almost $1.4 million ahead for the month, or $6,178,000 ahead for the year to date. So that was an incredible month. And the difference between last month and this month were in the broad category of retail sales. So I haven't had a chance to analyze it since we just received it today, but there's a lot of items in retail sales, so, but it's pretty good. And without a hailstorm, so that's kind of nice. And then
one quick question for you. When you receive late payments, you allocate those to previous months, the appropriate months that they come in?
No, every year since the beginning, they're in the current month, and the city keeps them in the current month, they just mention them.
Gotcha. And
PPRTA doesn't have as much as like the city. A lot of times those are from major audits. So then on page 2, we're ahead of the July actual by $1 million, and that's that retail sales again. It was just $1 million more than last month. I mean, yeah, which kind of equates to this. And then year to date, we're ahead of actual $3,626,000. So does anybody have any questions?
None, and you can sit down, because I was looking at last month's agenda. So we'll go back to
Okay.
item 5, and...
I was confused.
So was I, but I was looking at the right line, but the wrong agenda. So we will go to item 5 on this month's agenda, and Jim, if you want to come up and present the citizen advisory.
Thank you. I was out of the room anyway for an emergency. So, Jim Godfrey, chair of the CAC, CAC of the chair here. So our meeting last week, the quick summary, the city brought forward 4 contracts that are in your packet. Several of them have already been completed, and they're wrapping up, such as the a turn lane on North Nevada and some wrap-up utility stuff on the Academy over Cottonwood Creek. We looked at all 4 of those contracts and had no issues and recommend approval of those. Also included in the city's contract list was a discussion item having to do with Centennial Boulevard Extension. This is from the VA hospital around to Fontanero. About a year or so ago, city brought forward a request for payment and a contract where the landowner was going to mitigate a dump, an unregulated dump that was in there, and they signed a contract, and I think it was $1,140,000 at the time that we used RTA money for. At the time, it was a contract. This landowner was going to take care of all the permitting and fixing it and do all that kind of work and be responsible for doing that. Now, this discussion centered around he hasn't met that commitment. And the other part of that decision was that the city felt like that the price he was asking to mitigate and complete that work was less than they could go out and contract that work for. And so that we felt like that was a good deal, and that was what approved. So the discussion, current discussion, is the guy has not met that commitment. He needs additional money or additional dirt and some additional requirements. The city hasn't requested anything. It was an information to kind of give us a heads up about what might be coming, and to get our feel for what we thought about that. And so that 5th item on the city's contract list that's kind of what that's like, and they're asking for another $850,000. So we'll let Mike talk to that, or the city talk to that when they come forward. There were some other line item transfers from Dublin Boulevard, from Dublin Road to Bridle Pass to Powers. They were going to move that to Fillmore over a bridge. There was a line item request for that. And there was a line item request for the main line over Fontanero Bridge, which is an A-list project. This was for design. That bridge was built back in the 40s or 50s or something pretty bad. And so they're wanting to accelerate the design process on that bridge, and they want to move some money into there to do that. So we had good discussions about those, and we recommend approval of those line item transfers. The other big discussion we had, as you know, we started the discussion on taking a deep dive into the program funds last month. We asked Mike to come back with some additional detail. He did so. That information's in your packet. We think that this review was very beneficial for us. Full disclosure, I think we've all, the members of the CAC, have at one point in time been a little critical of some of these funds, but it was from a lack of knowledge. I'll be the first to admit that taking this deep dive into these things was very informative for us. It shows that there is a plan, that there's a program, that they've accomplished some good work, that they do have projects that they're moving forward with, that they want to complete, and they're viable. These are all A-listed projects, and that they all fit into the overall scheme of infrastructure work within the city. And our hope is that this review does the same for you. Looking at the members of the CAC after our discussion, which was probably an hour maybe or so, in fairly level detail. Looking at the feedback from the members of the CAC, we all agree that this was a very worthwhile process, that we are more informed in how this fits in. I think Mike will bring this up. I think the three points that we took away from this was that the actual A-list projects were projected based on 70% of projected revenue at the time, so that if there were perturbations in the revenue streams, that we wouldn't have to modify that list too strongly. However, for these projects, they were planned on and estimated on to be funded through the whole 10-year period of the thing. And while the estimates that were done 12 years ago, or back in 2012 at the beginning of RTA 2, I'm going to go out on a limb here, but I don't recall a single one of those projects that isn't overestimate based on the 2012 estimate that was projected at the time when they put this list together. So, like I said, I think the CAC got a lot out of this. We hope you do as well. We look at this as one step, the first step in looking into these projects and where they fit, and we'll get more into it in the joint meeting afterwards if you want. So.
The chair does have a question, but before I ask, does anybody else have any questions? Or on again. The chair does have a question, but before I get to my question, does anybody else have any questions or comments? Mr. Godfrey, I just asked to elaborate the 2012 list for A-list included this program fund amount.
Correct.
Okay. And the estimate in 2012 was an anticipated, at least a back of the napkin, I think is the word you used, or back of envelope estimate of what it would cost for these A-list items in 2012. Is that my correct understanding?
My understanding, and the city can correct this when they make their presentation, but it was our understanding was that though that estimate represented the projects they felt like they had on their radar that they could do at that point in time.
And for that amount of money?
For that amount of money.
Okay. And each of these program funds has subsequently been included in each of the budgets that have been approved every year?
That's correct.
Okay. So it's not that they're over budget, it's that they are over estimate. And
that would be an accurate statement.
all right. Mr. Williams.
The program funds are also in the B list, correct?
Yes, I think so, yes.
Yeah. So part of it was, some of it was going to be done in conjunction with the A list projects, and part of it was going to be done in conjunction with other B list projects.
You could make that statement if it's in the B list, yes.
Okay. Thanks.
I think that the key thing between RTA 1 and RTA 2 and the expansion, there were some program funds in RTA 1 as well. Mm-hmm. The purpose was to provide the city some flexibility in things that you just can't foresee. And I think the list of projects that they provided gave us some insight into the kinds of things that they were doing with those funds. And you can, each person can take their own value on those intersections and things.
In any other questions? One other follow-up then. Did Mr. Chavez also present to the Citizen Advisory Council's satisfaction the diagram for completion of the A-list projects that are listed?
Yes. the trajectory for completion of A-list projects was 2 years before the end of the completion. Was it 21, Mike? The trajectory? It was 2 years prior to the completion of the RTA, so whatever that was. But
Okay. All right. Okay. Any other questions or comments for Mr. Godfrey? I would entertain a motion to approve the CAC report.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then item 5A, Mr. Brian Galpin could not be here yet again. But he did ask that we acknowledge his service. So I will read the certificate, and I will reread it again when we follow this meeting with the joint CAC and PPRTA meeting. The Pikes Peak Rural Transportation Authority wishes to acknowledge its deepest gratitude to Brian Galpin for his invaluable contribution to the PPRTA Citizen Advisory Committee, February 2018 to July 2019, signed by me and Mr. Godfrey. Although he can't be here, I do want to acknowledge his service and thank him for that service. Item 6B, budget calendar and revenue estimate.
Good afternoon again. So the budget calendar is on the reverse side of the memo. For the 2020 calendar year, it's very similar to last year. It's really just off one day. And I need approval of that today from the board. And then I also handed out the 2020 budget revenue projection, which has $102 million worth of sales and use tax that was approved by the board last month. So that's at each one of your seats also, just for informational purposes.
Are there any questions regarding the 2020 budget calendar and revenue estimate? I would entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you. It has
Thank
been
you.
approved. Item 7A, City of Colorado Springs capital maintenance and public transportation contracts.
Good afternoon, Mike Chavez, City Engineering. I've got, 4 contracts for you to review and approve, hopefully. First one is a change order to Martin Marietta. They built and extended the right turn lane that goes from northbound Nevada to the Nevada frontage road. And so there was a short right turn lane that was backing up really bad into the through lane, so we've actually extended that all the way from Nevada all the way to the next intersection to the south, which is the entrance to the University Village. It's by Trader Joe's, and then also on the east side it goes into the UCCS's athletic area. So that's a continuous lane. So right now we have 3 lanes northbound all the way up to Nevada, and then 2 that go onto the highway. They ran into some unsuitable soil and had to do some extra work, and so that change order for $90,000 is to cover that work. Next item is it's a bridge maintenance contract, and per the new RTA policies, we said that we raised the limits on the task orders for bridge maintenance. And we said that if anything comes over $750,000, we'd bring it to the board. So we have a bridge on Stetson Hills that needs some repair, and it's pretty pricey. It's $850,000. The main problem there is the bridge is about 17 years old. Back then, the city was, in development side, was having bridges built without a concrete approach slabs, because there's a lot of complaints about the bumps when you hit those joints between the approach slab and the bridge. So we kind of were looking at building them without approach slabs to see if that would help with the smoothness of the drive. But what has happened on this bridge is because there was no approach slab, we've had a lot of settlement before the bridge, before the abutment. That has caused the storm pipe underneath there to break and leak and saturated the ground and created a lot of damage. So we're going to fix this bridge. We're going to put a approach slab in and take care of some other issues. The guardrail is rusted and needs painting, which is about the time it needs. It's almost 20 years. And we feel that with the approach slab, we'll get that bridge in good condition, and we should be good to have a good at least 30 years of service life on that. We do build bridges with approach slabs now. We kind of got away from that thought philosophy. Then the next two items is they're just cost share finalization with CSU on the Academy over Cottonwood Creek Bridge. First one is with gas. Our 40% of our share is $90,000 for the relocate. There was quite a bit of utility work that was needed to accommodate that new bridge that was built. And the next one is for the electric side of CSU, and our share, 40%, is $115. So this is in the budget, and this will kind of finalize the project.
Any questions on items 7A through D?
Move approval.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries. 7E is informational only, as I understand.
Yes. So last year, we came to the CAC and the board with a proposal to work, partner with MVS, who owns the land where the Centennial Extension project is going through south of the VA hospital. We actually have the right-of-way dedicated to us, but part of that land, the city right-of-way, is over an existing landfill. And so the whole property, most of his property, is this purple area, and you see that some of the landfill goes under this portion of the road, and there's a pretty good-sized finger that comes along here. So we weren't, he was obligated to clean up the right-of-way, but his agreement with city expired, but he still wanted to proceed, so he came to us, and we worked with him. And so what we worked out was we thought it would cost the city, if we did it on our own, maybe $1 million to $2 million to excavate the roadway, because we're cutting down about 20 feet of dirt, take out the trash, and just mitigate all that. And that was just an estimate based on the known area of the landfill, which was based on potholes, which was, it was pretty extensive, but we didn't know. So we thought there was a risk that could be a bigger mess. So he came to us, and we worked out a deal where he would grade the road to the subgrade, and also, go below that and take out any trash that needed to be taken out. And that dirt work and some other stuff that we worked out with him, we came up with a number of about $1.4 million, which we thought was a good deal for him to do that work for us, and he would benefit too. So we came to the board, and we said that we thought it was well worth it because the price was reasonable. It was what we probably would spend, and it puts the risk on him. So we finished that and went with that agreement. He's actually been out there working for a couple of months, and what he's come across is what we feared was there's more trash. It's a bigger area, and so he needs to excavate more of that out. And so he has come to us with a proposal that he needs dirt. He needs extra dirt. Let me go back. Okay. So south of so the oval area is where he's working at. He's got to clean up not the whole area of landfill, but also our right-of-way. He needs more dirt. Well, the southern 1,600 feet of our proposed project has excess dirt. And so he has come and requested that we work with him, and he is willing to excavate our road another 1,600 feet down the subgrade, and he would be able to use and keep that dirt. And the price that he's proposed, about $850,000, and that's a good unit price. It's work that we're going to have to do and pay for anyway, and it actually helps us because we're about a year or more out from doing the project ourselves, so prices of earthwork probably go up in that time. We don't have a firm number because one of the things that we may also have him do is do some of the storm drain, extend it down. There's a storm drain that ends at Van Buren, and which is here. We may have him extend it further down so that the water that's coming down the whole drainage basin will go into the storm sewer and not over our newly cut roadway section and saturate it and create problems in the future. So again, if we work out a price that we think is reasonable, we may have him do that work and pay for him. So I just wanted to get a feel from the CAC and the board on whether you think that's something you would consider. We think it's a good deal, gets more of the roadway project done, continues to keep the risk of the landfill mediation on him, and gets more of our project done at a cost that we think we'd be paying anyway.
Any questions? I do have a clarifying question, but from anybody else, any comments, any questions? So the proposed scope of work for last year's contract is essentially represented by the oval area.
Yes.
And that the new contract includes the oval and the rectangle area to the left on the picture.
Yes.
So it's actually it's not an additional payment to complete last year's. It's an additional payment to complete last year's and do additional work.
Yes. So basically, we've got a set price on the first phase of that, he's not asking for more money for that, but he said in working with him, he needs dirt. We need that dirt moved, so he's offered to do it, and we think it's a good deal to pay for it and get it done.
Any other questions or comments? All right. Are you looking for like a?
I just said, so, I mean, in general, do you think that?
In general, I'd be supportive of that.
Okay.
I saw Mr. Williams enthusiastically putting both thumbs up, so. No, I can't speak for anybody else, but I think it would be, it seems appropriate to me.
Okay, so we will probably come back, it might be November, actually, but with more detail and some more firm costs, but I just wanted to get an initial kind of feel for the board. Okay.
Any comments, questions? All right.
All right,
Thank you, Mike. Item 8A, City of Colorado Springs Transit Services Monthly Report. I thought I saw Mr. Blewett hiding in the background. He's not afraid of City Council yet.
Well, good afternoon, board members. Craig Blewett, Transit Services Manager with the City of Colorado Springs. Our monthly report is in your agenda packet, just a few highlights to hit. With regard to our local fixed route bus service, we saw a healthy 12.3% increase compared to July of 2018. For July 2019, there was an additional weekday, which helps, one less Sunday. That helps, but that would not explain a 12.3% increase, so we're very excited about that. I should note, if you look at all of 2019 through the first 7 months, we've seen an increase in ridership of 5.3%. So that's a big rebound over the ridership we saw last year. The ADA paratransit service, on the flip side of that, we actually saw a decrease of 6.3% in ridership over the first 7 months of 2019. And for this past month, July 2018, or 19 compared to 18, we're down 3.5%. Van pools, we saw a healthy rebound over June's ridership. So we had an increase compared to the July previous of about 2.8%, but again, a big rebound over last month. Again, there is some month-to-month variation in van pool ridership as folks change job locations and schedules. Some things to highlight under projects. We have begun the planning process for the new regional transit plan, 2045 transit plan. That process has begun, as well as a North Nevada Avenue transit corridor analysis. So both of those are underway. We have stakeholder groups that are working with us on that. We also are doing some focus groups and some one-on-one interviews, and there will be public meetings scheduled as well for general public input. The fall service change is scheduled to be implemented on Sunday, September 29th. We've gone over that a number of times at this meeting. If you have any questions on that, I'd be happy to answer. And at this point, I wouldn't mind covering the quarterly report as well under this time, if that's okay. And so our quarterly report is in your packet, so I'll take questions at this time regarding our monthly report or the quarterly contract report.
Any questions for Mr. Blewett? Craig, one of the things that I had asked before, and just kind of to generally, I'd like to see how the trends in Colorado Springs are comparing with regional trends for usage and national trends for usage.
Sure.
Be interesting to see if the 12.3% increase in the month or 5.3% year-to-date are unique to Colorado Springs and our area, or if there's something more systemic that's happening.
Sure. Just a general response to that. My understanding is nationally ridership is still down. Again, with the good economy and cars being cheaper, insurance being cheaper, fuel certainly being low price currently. Nationally, there tends to be a downtick in ridership because of the economy. We're seeing a healthy increase, and we're very happy about that. I would add just one thing to that. Over the past year, we've spent $1.7 million on access improvements to our bus stops, and that includes, 1.3 miles of sidewalk we've constructed in the last year, 67 ADA-compliant ped ramps along bus routes, and we've installed 71 concrete bus bench pads at those bus stops as well. And, that improves access for everyone to bus stops, including people with disabilities who maybe before couldn't walk or roll to the bus stop who can now. And that could be one of the explanations or contribute to the explanation of why we're seeing such a big increase in fixed route bus usage and a decrease in ADA usage. And that's a positive thing. We want folks to be able to access our system.
Well, that's very good news. Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Blewett? All right. Mr. Chavez, if you would come back. I thought that the motion was pretty clear, but apparently it wasn't, so we need to address 7B, the fund transfer from Dublin Road, Bridle Pass to Powers, West Fillmore. Any questions on 7B? It's in the packet, and I'm not sure if you want to address anything or...
No, so basically the Dublin project finished up with some money left over, and so did the Academy. So,
and you can do 7B, C, and D if you want to do them all.
And so there was three projects on the A list that we thought we weren't going to actually start till 2022. And with this money that we have, we want to put some into it, begin the design process on them so we can get those to construction sooner, and also so we have a better idea of what the project's really going to cost. So that would move money, it'd move 180 from Dublin to the West Fillmore over an unnamed channel. And that's basically, there's a culvert under Coronado, near Coronado High School. That'll be bored or jacked, so we're not going to tear up the road that we're doing with 2C right now. Looking at moving $300,000 from Dublin to the UPPR mainline bridge over Fontenelle Road to start the design on that. And then from the Academy project, we're looking at moving $220,000 to the Galley Road Bridge over the west fork of Sand Creek.
So any questions on 7B, C, or D, Mr. Williams?
Move approval of items 7B, 7C, and 7D.
Got that? Yes, all right. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Those carry. Thank you, sir. And you're up here for the details of program funds, item 8B.
Okay, so I'm just going to do an overview of kind of where we are with the program, the RTA2 programs, and those are A-list projects that were on the ballot. So as a brief overview, there's 5 traffic categories and 2 pedestrian programs. On the traffic programs, what we've got under the citywide intersection improvements, we've are working on or have completed 20 intersection improvements. We've done 31 on-street bike lane improvements, and those are either trail crossings or corridor projects. We've got 12 roadway and safety and traffic operation projects that are underway or completed. We've got 4 congestion incident management, and we're about through 50 of the 60 signal upgrades that were on the A list. On the sidewalk, and those we call them pedestrian improvements, but basically to shorten it, the missing sidewalk program. There's actually two. There's a general one, and then one that's concentrates on near schools and neighborhoods. So between those two programs, we've installed about 57,000 linear feet of sidewalk, and they concentrate on missing segments, not so much ramps and corners. We've also used that money to supplement the North Cascade sidewalk and bus stop improvements, and we'll be using it on the Fillmore corridor projects. And those are just, we're just using a little bit of that money to help with the grants that we had for those two projects. The other big project that's been kind of highly visible is the Pike Creek Greenway trail improvements. With that program, we've funded the basic bridge structure of the Southwest Downtown Pedestrian Bridge, and we also completed the underpass, trail underpass under Uinta Street last year. A couple of projects that Parks is looking at to use that money for is redoing the trail from I-25 from Rock Ribbon to Cottonwood Creek, and that would be a grant match. So we have some funding, so we'll be leveraging the Greenway Trail funds to complete a grant, and then they've got some work that they're looking at from Uinta to the Mesa Creek crossing. Those are some future projects that they're looking at doing. A couple of things that have kind of come up that weren't anticipated originally. We've got $4.6 million on the pedestrian bridge that was, I think, something we weren't anticipating. And then on the roadway safety and traffic operations, we've had $3.6 million approved to go to the Sierra Madre, Nevada street reconstruction. We had $6 million go to the I-25 Cimarron project, the ramp match. It's part of a local contribution. We've got $750,000 that's gone to the landscaping of that project. And then we did commit to put up to $1 million on the UCCS Spine Road. And that one, like I said, that project was, I think, just kind of an innovative thing that we thought would bring some benefit at a much less cost than if we were to try to redo the intersection itself at Awesome Bluffs in Nevada. So this is kind of an overview of where we stand with the programs. So what we have, so when we put together our TA2, we decided to go with a 75% of revenue projection to complete our A-list projects. And the thinking there is that we had a really bad downturn in our TA1, so we didn't want to. We have this huge list of projects, and we had a rough cost estimate. So we instead of banking on sending an A-list to the voters that assume 90% of funding, that we would say we would finish because of a possible economic downturn, we thought 75% of the funds was a safer number. So basically what we did is we went down the list to where 75% of projected revenues would be, and that was what the A-list projects were chosen from. And in that process, and I don't recall exactly, but in that process, there's a certain allocation for the programs was also carved out, and I don't know if exactly how that was done, but basically we just wanted to make sure that that the A list had enough funding to complete. Now I think the thought at that time was that the program funding would go on through the whole 10 years, but if there was revenue, I think if the revenues exceeded and were available. And the 75% for the projects was an estimate, but again, we anticipated costs are going to go up, and we'll need to cover those costs, assuming there's revenue and fortunately, the economy's done well, and revenue has come in to cover both projects and programs.
Mike, are all those in the B list as well? Because you talk about it continuing, so part of it was continuing into that.
Well, our thought, and Kathleen and myself and other people who worked on the RT1, the B list was something that we weren't sure we'd get to, but if we did, we assumed that the B list was going to be prioritized on projects. So I think our thought was they're going to, and I think the B list has to be approved. I forget, there's something language, but our thought was that any money left over or any work we did on the B list would be in actual projects. So we didn't think that the programs would be funded.
But aren't some of these categories in the B list?
Well, the program category is in the B list.
Okay.
But like I said,
Okay.
with whatever is left over, we're going to have to prioritize, and I don't think the programs would be a priority. I think it'd be projects. So, and I think that's one of the reasons why we thought the program funding would actually be for the whole 10 years, because B list would then take over, and there wouldn't be any, we probably wouldn't put B list money in the programs. It'd be going to projects.
Okay, because all A has to be funded before you can do any of the B, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Now, the programs don't have specific listed projects. It's just, it's a year-to-year as the need comes up. Yeah, and so basically what I'm showing here is, here's the original allocation, the 7-year allocation for the programs. Here's what we have actually approved today. And, obviously roadway and safety is over because of these, extra projects that came up. Same with the Pike Street Greenway. Here's where we're at.
Excuse me, I was trying to get your attention. Geislinger. When you say here, here, and here, I have no idea what you're talking about. So I wonder if you could put a number or percentage to that?
So what we have is so we have the 7 programs. We have intersection safety, on-street bike improvements, roadway safety and traffic operations, congestion and incident management, traffic signal upgrades, pedestrian improvements, school and neighborhoods pedestrian improvements, and the Pike Street Greenway. So the first column we have is the original estimate, or allocation to those. So let's just go across. So for intersection improvements, the original allocation was $6.1 million. We've 6.17 million. We've actually approved 6.12 to date, and we've spent 2.7 million, or have it contracted, encumbered. We have 2.1 million of planned projects, and there's more detail on the other sheets. And those projects are funds. The planned projects are actual projects that we have plans and ideas to spend. And then the future projects, we've got 1.2 million basically left over that is not really dedicated to anything. On-street bike, we've got 3 million allocation. We've approved 2.6 million. We spent and have encumbered 1.4. On planned projects, we've got 1.1 million. So that leaves 136,000 for future projects that haven't been identified. Roadway safety, again, allocated 8.1. We've approved 12.7 million, and we've spent or encumbered 9.9 million. We got 2.2 million of planned projects and about 37,000 left for future projects. Congestion and incident management, we've got 3 million allocated, 2 million approved. We've spent 545,000. We've got 700,000 in planned projects and about 814 left over for future projects. Signal upgrades, allocation 14.9 million, approved to date 9.6, spent and encumbered 8.3 million. We've got about 321,000 in planned projects, and that leaves 913 for future projects. pedestrian improvements, 5.1 allocated, allocated, 3.7 actually approved, 3.4 spent. We've got about 266,000 left for planned projects, and we'll spend all the money so we won't have any left over. Neighborhood safety, about 3.3 million estimated, 2 million approved, 2,259,000. We've spent 2,032,000, so we got about $27,000 in planned projects which we will use. And then the Greenway, 2.1 was the original allocation. We've approved 6.5 for the budget. We've spent or encumbered 5.4. We've got about 1.57 in planned projects, and so that leaves a deficit of about $500,000. And that comes from the thought I have is I'd like to give Park and Rec 2.1 million to actually spend on the Greenway Trail besides the bridge. I think the biggest thing that comes out of this is there was a lot of thought or perception that there was a lot of, millions just kind of sitting unused, and we really don't have that. The biggest one that has, kind of a pretty good reserve is the intersection improvements in 1.2, but we haven't identified them, but for 2020 we will. We've got lots of intersections that need work, so that money will be used. It's not like we don't have the need, but I think that's what's kind of come out of it is there isn't really a lot of money that's unplanned or unaccounted for. Then quickly on the emergency bridge, this is an A-list project. What we've got here is we've actually completed several bridges, including some B-listed bridges, and the reason that is we've had some bridges. So basically our A-list bridges were the ones that we felt were the most imminently needing to be fixed. Not that they were going to fall down, because we're not keeping bridges open that are going to fall down, but they were our most urgent and critical ones. And again, we only had so much money, so we had to cut the bridge list out at some point, and then we continued down the condition of the bridge, and the next list of bridges were the B list. Now, bridges are interesting because they can go south on you at any time, depending on weather, rain, and things like that. So we've had a few B-list bridges come up as a priority. The biggest one being the Mark Dabbling bridges. Those two were actually B-list bridges. They're actually large culverts under Mark Dabbling north of Garden of the Gods. And one of the culverts developed a large hole, and created a large sinkhole. The road caved in. Dangerous situation. We moved both of those up to fix because they were both in the same condition. They were they were located at different locations, but similar age and condition. And since one failed, we were afraid the other one was going to fail. And we were concerned that if there was a large enough storm that created a large enough void, it would collapse the 54-inch sanitary sewer above them, and all that would have a direct line to Monument Creek. So from a risk assessment, we came to the board and said, we really want to fix these bridges now before that happens and eliminate that risk, and that's why the Mark Dabbling moved up, and that's kind of an exception that the board has approved for some B-list bridges. So we fixed some other. Rock Rimmon was actually a grant, but we used $21,000 to supplement out of the emergency bridge to complete it. Enchanted was an A-list bridge, but it was close to Fascination, which is a street, local residential streets. Those two culverts were very close to failing, so we thought it would be best to get those two taken care of. So we did move that B-list bridge up and used $277,000. Colony Hills, Las Vegas River Colony Hills, we've got a $1.3 million grant, but we need a little bit of supplemental money, so we used the emergency bridge to supplement that, and we'll get that built next year. So that's what we finished. So we've done about $4.4 million worth of work. We've got about $1.3 million of other work that is coming up eminently right now. We've got Verde Bridge is actually under construction, so we had some general fund money, but we need a little bit more to get the project whole, so we used the emergency bridge fund. Let's see, Paseo, we're designing that again. We're supplementing a grant with our emergency bridge fund money. Need a little bit for construction management for the Colony Hills project. Going to use a little bit of emergency bridge money for the Wooten over Sand Creek project. That's mostly general fund, but we need a little bit more for project management. And then this is probably going to come as a request. The Fontenarrow siding, not the main line, but the railroad bridge at Fontenarrow, the siding and the main line were designed inadequately, and they're half as strong as they should be. So the main line had some severe cracking a few years ago. So we went in there and shored both the main line and the siding. And we have moved up the main line bridge through the transfer we just did. But we are probably going to come back and ask that we use the emergency bridge fund to do the siding also, because when we do those bridges, we need to lower the road about 2 feet to build adequate clearance for the railroad. And we're concerned that when we cut down on the main line and the siding bridge, we're going to be at risk, and we're not real sure about how we could do that, and because we would have to basically move the train traffic to the siding while we work on the mainline bridge. And I think we're concerned that trying to use the siding in its existing condition would be unsafe. So we're going to try to do those two projects simultaneously per approval of the board.
Clarify that the main line is A.
And is B, yes. So we would need to get approval from the board to bring the siding bridge into the project. But we think from a safety standpoint, we have to do them together. So that's something we'll be requesting here probably in the near future. So let's just get back to the overall. So we've got $7.3 million approved. We've spent $4.4. We've got $2.8 million in planned projects, and that includes that $1.3 million of named or identified work that we need. So that leaves about 1.5 of reserve, and we'd actually like to kind of leave that there in case, we do have something spring up on us. And then there's a couple of other projects that we are coming down the line. So depending on how the budgets look, we might ask for another $4.5 million, at least 2.5 for the Cheyenne Canyon bridges, which are under design now. But again, this is just kind of something on our radar. Not that we're not sure if we'll make that request, but we may, at least for the Cheyenne. There's a grant for Cheyenne Canyon bridges, but there's 3 bridges, but we aren't able to build all 3 with just the grant, so we might want to supplement it with emergency bridge money.
Mr. Williams?
So, as I understand then, we had some bridges in A, some bridges in B. We then had an emergency bridge fund to say, hey, it's possible some of the ones in B or one that's not listed at all might need to be replaced.
Yes.
And
Or repaired.
Or repaired. Right. Yeah. But thank you for clarifying. Yes. Many times it is much cheaper to repair than replace. And so as we do this, when I'm looking at the 17 by 11, if I've got my dimensions correct, okay, 17 by 11 list, this is one of those where the city's original estimate of $5 million or so was kind of off based on what we needed to do. And so my question for you is, we called this emergency. As our engineer, are you comfortable describing each of these as an emergency as opposed to a nice to have?
Okay, it definitely isn't a nice to have. I think if you look at the memo, the emergency or the the sheet on the emergency bridge, the definition is, this is for emergencies that come up. And it says if there is no emergency, we will go to our most critical bridges. An emergency bridge is one that is failing or fails on you. And the bridge program does a really good job of inspecting and monitoring, and there's about 13 bridges. We inspect them every 2 years, but there's like 13 bridges we inspect every 90 days.
So were
So-
these, the bridges here,
Some-
all in the failing or failed category?
They were close. So if we don't have a bridge that fails, then we go to the bridges that we feel are most at risk.
Okay.
And that's kind of how that's how we've gotten these. And the Mark Dabbling, we thought was, well, one of them failed in the culvert upstream or downstream from it, was in the same condition and same age, and so we were concerned. So we thought those two were at risk, so we fixed them. So that's kind of how this bridge selection goes. It's not that they're failing, because we don't want to wait till they fail, but if they are in a condition that we think they're at risk, we want to go and start fixing them or replacing them.
Thanks.
All right. Was there any other, let me see, any other questions on the individual sheets for the traffic programs?
I actually have a question. This has been very informative, first of all, in terms of what are program funds, what are the expenditures that we are using this for, the amount of program funds, in terms of linear feet of sidewalks and all that. Very, very, very helpful. I think, if my math is correct, there's going to be roughly an additional $200 million of funds available to Colorado Springs before the end of this iteration of PPRTA. I would assume that this general planning process going forward is the expectation, is you're going to use the funds or budget the funds each year based on the expectation of where you need to go and do things going forward in pretty much the same way as you've done in the past. That's your expectation?
Yes.
Okay.
And we can briefly touch on the 8.5 by 11 spreadsheet. So what I'm showing here is basically we're going to be probably coming next month with a budget request for 2020, and so I'm showing what we're anticipating of requesting for approval. We've got money for the projects listed, and then we've got money for the programs. We've got transit and trails. And actually, the trails, the only money I'm requesting is about 1.2, and that's to get the greenway kind of whole. And the other trail programs have actually, we have allocated the original estimate. Once we do the 1.2 for the greenway, and then Sinton and Templeton Gap have not gotten their funding yet, so in 2020 they would get it. We're looking at funding transit and the programs at the same levels in 2020, so we've got a $40 million target that we're expecting, so I've kind of got that balanced out exactly. Then what I've shown is in 21, 22, 3, and 4, kind of what we think we need to finish out the program. That includes the very top orange two projects. Those are the Academy reconstructions. We've got that in design, and I've bumped up those budgets quite a bit based on kind of what we're thinking the costs are going to be. So I show, construction money in 21 and 22. That kind of goes down. Same thing, the other big one is the Circle Bridges. It's really one project, but there's 4 individual bridges. Yes, so, the Circle Bridges are, again, that's another one. Okay, yes. So we are looking at, we had about originally $18 million for both. There's 2 segments, Airport to Bijou and Fountain to Martin Luther King, or Milton Proby, I'm saying, Milton Proby. So we had about 18 million for those two segments, and at this point, I'm showing about 26 million, because we're just expecting costs to go up, and then we got to take care of another landfill there, unfortunately. So that project, we're anticipating, to be more than the original allocation, so I show that we've added, what was that, another 6 million? 18, yeah. Similarly with the circle bridges, we originally had about 13 million. We're going to go to bid on that next year, and we're looking at costs closer to about 25 million. So those projects, all the projects that are funded through 2024, we're looking at having everything funded by 2023. I would put another $1 million in 24 to the emergency bridge fund, and like I said, these are with inflated costs that that we're anticipating. On the programs, what I've done is continue the transit funding at the same level through 2024, and then on the traffic programs, we have 60 signals to finish. We think if we don't finish it this year or in 2020 with a $2 million allocation, we might need a $1 million allocation in 2021 for the signals. And then the rest of the years, we actually would zero that out, but we would continue the traffic and pedestrian programs at the same funding level through 2024. And what that gets us is that basically it shows that if you look at toward the bottom there, 2020 and 2021, basically we've committed all the funds that we expect to get. I'm anticipating $39 million in 2021. But then when you get to 2022, we're anticipating needing $36,181 million, and I actually am just counting on $36 million. Again, if things change, I don't want to assume that this 40 is going to carry. It'd be great if it does, but just to be conservative, let's say revenues go down. If we got $36 million in 2022, we're okay. 2023, we need $21 million. If we get $36 million, we've got $14 million. That could be either used to supplement A-list projects that are over budget, so it'd be project contingency or a B-list projects. 2024, same thing. Looks like we might need about $5 million. If we get $36 million, there's $30 million. So we've got 14, yeah, so we've got $45 million possibly available for additional project costs or B-list projects. And we would finish the A-list projects, for the most part, will be done by 2023. Most of them, a couple of these that are funded in 23 might carry over into 2024.
Mr. Williams?
Let me just clarify that some of particularly in those last 3 years, what you're listing it as is actually in Category B and those aspects of it, as opposed to continuation of Category A, because those projects all show up, the broad categories all show up in Category B, and that's something that this might be a proposal, but ultimately council and this board will have to decide where to rank the various Category B projects to the extent they reach their Category A allocation. So this is a useful planning document, but ultimately subject to approval of this board.
Yes, but I did want to make it clear that city staff would like to fund these programs through the whole year, because there are needs there. Traffic.
There are also huge needs in Category B, and balancing those out is ultimately something that council and this board will have to choose which of those B projects get funded.
I understand that. Yes, Ms. Williams.
So in the packet that you have for item 8B, on-street bikeway improvements, not being an avid bicycler myself, what is wayfinding? Is that a software application?
No, that is actually signage, so that
Okay.
when you're using the bike routes and lanes, it'll tell you,
Well, I never have to ask for directions because I'm a woman, right? Or Wayne's driving. Okay, got it. Thank you.
Okay, so I think that's all I have. Like I said, I just kind of wanted to bring kind of a proposal or initial thought of how we'd like to finish funding out the RTA. And I think what we're trying to show is that we think we're going to get through the A-list projects before the 2024. We're pushing, and that's one of the reasons why we moved those 3 projects up today in today's line item transfer.
Any other questions or comments? I do recognize that there are many members of the CAC who are here, and I thank you for coming early. We're going to have a meeting shortly. Mike, will you stay for at least
Yes.
that meeting to address? Because I know that the CAC went through this, and we would love to have your input on that. But I would ask Jim, have we missed anything that you think is significant for this meeting?
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that on the overall program view things that Mike showed on this chart, Mike, go back to your summary chart, that those numbers in the first column under original program estimates were only estimates through the first 7 years. So there was, at the time that was put together, so it did not include the whole 10-year period.
Right. Mr. Williams.
Yeah, because the goal was to be done with A through the first 7 years, then we're in B, so that's why it would have the first 7. Mike, let me ask you, I know that estimating things is not easy going forward. And costs escalate, and there's unknown conditions. But for a lot of these projects, since we're just talking about Circle, it's almost double. Some of the others have been
Almost double.
yeah. Is there a way, or and I don't need an answer today, but how much would it cost for us to get better estimates for Pikes Peak RTA 2? And I don't need an answer today, or Pikes Peak RTA 3, or the second renewal, whichever you want to call it. But if you could talk that over, because I am, whether it's a county project, whether it's a city project, whatever it is, a lot of these were way off. And in Pikes Peak RTA 1, we were closer than we were, it seems like. So
So a couple thoughts.
and again, I don't need the answer.
No,
yet.
but just RTA 1, we were experiencing some very high construction cost inflation for the first few years. And we were worried, we're not going to have enough money to get the list. But then the downturn came, and we were getting some great prices on projects. So that kind of helped balance it out. Coming into RTA 2, we did an example of the street reconstruction. I know those numbers came in based on just what's it going to take to take out the pavement, put it back, a little, extra dirt work, maybe curb and gutter. But the reality is those projects have to address drainage, ADA compliance, and so when you factor those in, they've come up quite a bit more. And we also have had some really high construction inflation. So we are well aware of that. So as we put together numbers for this next set of projects, any project, whether it's RTA or city projects, we have a better idea. If we have a reconstruction project on New Street, we have a good number that we say this is the true cost to reconstruct the street. It's not a little bit of pavement curb, it's everything. We take that number, and then we can add some inflation to it so that, we know 10-year list, everything doesn't get done in year one. We kind of do an initial spread of projects. Those out projects, we can have a better cost and then add some inflation so that we can have some numbers that are more realistic. Now, my concern about that is it's going to scare the pants off you guys when we show you those numbers, but it's what it probably will happen.
Well,
and so I don't have to come up here and try to explain why we're off by 100%, 50%.
I'm not criticizing. I'm just saying, is there a way we can do it hopefully closer next time? The other thing for those who weren't here at the time. One of the reasons we made the Pikes Peak RTA first list is we got federal stimulus funds that covered almost, 35 million? 44, 40,
35, you're right.
35 million, okay, my first estimate was right, that we worked to get the Woodman Academy interchange built with federal stimulus funds because it was shovel-ready. Had we not had that 35 million,
Sure.
we'd have been in serious trouble to complete that A list, and so that was a huge part of it.
Any other questions, comments? I want to thank you for this. This is,
Okay.
and one of the things that I suggested during our lunch meeting is, from my perspective at least, this outline of projects that are completed and projects that are anticipated, now that it has been done, it would be helpful, I think, to kind of continue to provide this on an updated basis, if that's something that could work, and if the rest of the board thinks that would be a good thing to receive.
Yeah, and that'd be,
Quarterly.
that'd be very easy to update.
So if we could put that down then maybe as a quarterly update, and maybe ask the county, I think, to do the same. I'm not sure we need to have Manitou Springs or Green Mountain Falls or Rama do it, because that would be a little simpler. There it is, yes. But I think that this is helpful, and it certainly does show the transparency and reveal some things and clarify some misconceptions. So I think that would be a good thing to have. Any other questions or concerns? Mike, you're still up for the monthly change order and property acquisition report.
Any question? We only had one change order this month.
Any comments, concerns? It's in the packet. All right, thank you, sir.
All right, thank you.
And thank you for this
you're welcome.
information. It was good. Quarterly report from member governments, Mr. Sonnenberg.
This is an information item only. It's a quarterly report from the 5 member governments on what they've completed in the last quarter, or in this case, quarter number 2, second quarter of, calendar quarter of 2019. Any questions?
Doesn't appear that there are any. Item 9A, the administrative action and report. Item 9A, Mr. Sonnenberg and Mr. Lojinos Gonzalez and myself have been talking about what to do with regard to the vote that we had last time. Our council suggested at lunch that we just write a letter about what we did last time and publish it on the website. Any issues with that? Part of it was whether we were going to have a resolution, what the resolution would and would not say, and so the plan is, at least at this point, and Ms. Avila, you were not here, but there was a vote to take a position on House Bill 19-1258 that was approved 6-2, opposing that.
Opposing Prop CC in November
Prop
statewide.
CC. I'd be willing to just work with Mr. Sonnenberg, write a letter to reflect that decision and put it on the website. All right. The decision was 6-2 to oppose it.
And Prop CC is the statewide ballot
Statewide
measure.
ballot initiative.
That would, if the voters approve it, would give all state revenue in excess of the Tabor cap in 1/3 increments to public education, higher education, and transportation.
Well, some of that's the ballot language and some's statute.
You were.
I know it's gone, but then we'll talk about it later.
Yeah.
For you to talk with me.
All right, we can talk about that later. Item 10, PPRTA member announcements. Anybody have any member announcements? And we are going to adjourn now. Please stay around for the next meeting at 3 o'clock when we're going to be meeting with the CAC board. Welcome, everybody. We're adjourned. If you need to bail out,
Voice over on. Portrait. Messages. 4 unread messages.
If there's anyone who does not have the packet for the joint meeting, which is simply a cover sheet and a single memo, I have extra copies.
start this joint meeting of the Citizens Advisory Committee and the Board of Directors of the PPRTA. For those who don't know me, I'm Dave Geislinger. I am a member of Colorado Springs City Council and the current chair. We'll have the board members introduce themselves first. So we'll start with Assistant Chair, Vice Chair.
Hi, the Lojinos Gonzalez. I'm the Vice Chair for PPRTA. I'm an El Paso County Commissioner.
Yolanda.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Yolanda Avila. I am on City Council, and I serve District 4.
And I was told that Mr. Geray, the mayor of Manitou Springs, is gone, but we have a person with proxy over there. So the mayor's gone. Dennis?
I'm the mayor of Rama, Colorado. Dennis Carpenter.
Tyler Stevens, Mayor Pro Tem of Green Mountain Falls.
Holly Williams, El Paso County Commissioner.
Wayne Williams, at-large, Colorado Springs City Council, and the commissioner who put the original RTA on the ballot.
There's a couple of items that need to take place. First, I'm going to reread. Brian Galpin is a member that most of you or all of you are familiar with. He is he's moved, I think, and so he has resigned. He is not here today, but I do want to read the certificate of appreciation again. The Pikes Peak Rural Transportation Authority wishes to acknowledge its deepest gratitude to Brian Galpin for his invaluable contribution to the PPRTA Citizen Advisory Committee, February 2018 to July of 2019, signed by myself and Jim Godfrey. You guys get to look forward to getting one of these too someday. The second thing is this means a lot to me. This means a whole lot to me, and I want you guys to listen to this. I didn't write this, Rick did, but this is very important. Mr. Godfrey has advised the board that the CAC has had excellent attendance for the last 12 months. Since we rely upon you guys to do the deep dive into the details before the PPRTA, this excellent attendance by the CAC provides more eyes and ears on the issues, and by you guys spending this time that you do and this consideration that you do during your meetings, we are allowed the luxury of more informed and shorter meetings. So on behalf of the entire board, I would like to express our deepest appreciation to each of you for having excellent attendance in doing these volunteer jobs. This is especially notable because these are volunteer positions. And so by spending your time and effort to this model regional government, you are exemplifying a strong civic commitment to help assure that the PPRTA funds are spent efficiently, effectively, and appropriately to get the best bang for our buck. And so I want to thank you guys. And I'm going to ask Jim when we're done to tell me what the attendance numbers were. They were utterly outstanding. If you remember, if not, we'll go to Rick, and if Rick doesn't remember, we'll get it. All I remember is they are truly, truly outstanding.
Yeah, I'll let Rick talk to the numbers themselves if he remembers them. But what we decided as a couple of years ago as a policy was we had criteria for an excused absence, and so every August, Rick goes through all of the absences by individual and makes sure that they were all excused. We do this monthly, but he goes through in August and kind of does a summary of all those and checks to see that that all absences were excused. And we had very few. Most people were here at every meeting. Very few don't. Work obviously as a volunteer positions take precedence, but I would just like to commend the CAC and their time. Sometimes our meetings go a lot longer. I've been there and had to take time off work as well. Now that I'm retired, it's not so much important, but I know there's a lot of working engineers and a lot of working people in here, and I want to commend them and for their support of the CAC and the mission as well. And so, excellent job.
Yeah, and I think we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. It looks like 17 to 20 regular and alternates. And I think you said that nobody violated the unexcused volunteer, which is
Nobody
For a volunteer board, trust me, I'm on a lot of boards that are served by volunteer. For that number of people to have no violations is sensational, so thank you.
That's right.
Very, very much.
And with that lead-in, I'd like to have the CAC members introduce themselves. You know me, but Brian, being as you just sat down, why don't you start with the microphone and introduce yourselves, and all the CAC members go around and just introduce yourself.
And if you would also say the representative agency that you're with.
Okay. Brian West, at-large member for 16 years or something like that. I don't remember. Forever. Oh, thanks. What's it? At-large member, former member, El Paso County HAC twice. That's enough.
Okay.
My name is Carlos Perez. I'm an at-large alternate to the CAC.
Ann Nichols, City of Manitou Springs.
Karen Asplin, I represent CTAB.
Scott Barnhart from CTAB.
Ed Dills, I'm alternate at large, was on HAC.
Cheryl Everett, HAC.
Tom Biersma at large and also the HAC.
And our second vice chair.
Joan Lucia Treese, the town of Rama, and formerly the HAC.
Andy Gunning, not a CAC member, I'm with PPACG and PPRTA, but thank you for what you're doing.
Red Williams, CAC, HAC, and I don't know, bunches.
Ann?
Ann Esch, Green Mountain Falls.
Gene Bray, at large.
Rick Hoover, at large.
Thank you all again for your service and for being present today. The agenda is approved, and I think
I have spares if anybody doesn't have one.
essentially, as I understand it, we are going to be, thank you, addressing two items that I think were the subject items. Ed needs a copy, which is maintenance of effort, I think, was going to be the first discussion, and we were going to continue to talk a little bit for those of you who were here earlier, which is the Colorado Springs Program Fund, just kind of to follow up on that, I think. But we are certainly open to everything else. So that's the agenda. Does anybody have any additions, questions about the agenda? If not, can I get a motion for approval of the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Then we'll begin with public comment for items not on the agenda, and I think that might include you guys if there's something else that you would like to talk about. I think it's going to be kind of an informal discussion. We really do want to have an opportunity to hear from you and see what we can do. And he's got really, really big names. I still can't see them.
Just identify yourself as you go.
Ann, yes, that's a good idea.
From Green Mountain Falls. I don't know what you want us to sound off about, but I've mentioned this. I'm also on the PPACG from Green Mountain, and this particular group is called the Pikes Peak Rural Transportation Authority, and I'm concerned that our rural areas aren't getting enough attention. I realize that everybody puts in a certain amount of money and there's population considerations, but that's just a concern I have as a mountain person, and I think some of the people in the plains have the same problem.
Okay. I think, what I would say is, and we're having a discussion, at least the preliminary questions, about what does the next iteration of PPRTA look like.
Is that right?
One of the issues that I have been at least talking to folks about in non-member governments is to talk about what whether they want to participate.
Yeah, I know that's a problem. It is. And, but I've been doing this for just about a year, so I don't really know a lot yet, but I find it very interesting.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, Brian, thank you.
Make sure everybody hears me. Jumping right into the deep end with the meat of the issue, we've been discussing maintenance of effort forever, at least as long as I've been sitting, since 05, 06. The issue that we've had with maintenance of effort is there's been some use of legalese to get around actually doing the proper maintenance of effort in the past. That being done and over with at this particular point, we've also been going since 04, 05, and there's been no COLA adjustment, no cost of living, no inflationary adjustment for the maintenance of effort expectations from the governments. Now, that being said, there's only one government that's had an issue in the past. And I don't think it's unreasonable at this particular point in time for the citizens to expect government to live the way they do. As a citizen, we have to adjust. As a business owner, I have to adjust for inflationary costs and inflationary factors. It's reasonable to expect that the government to which we give our taxpayer money spend our taxes similarly and as responsibly, and also support the effort without supplementing or reducing or not meeting the specific maintenance of effort that was originally intended. And since intent was used as a way to get around the maintenance of effort the last time, I think it's reasonable for us as a body to discuss having government at least adjust to present day levels. I mean, we're well over more than a decade into this. We're already in the second iteration of this program, and there has been no adjustment for inflationary factors since 2004 when that was originally brought together.
Okay, and before we get to that, because that is the first item that we're going to talk on the agenda, is there anybody else who has issues outside of the agenda? So we can certainly go ahead now and talk about item 1, which is the maintenance of effort. Anybody else have any comments that they want to share on the maintenance of effort issue? Mr. Gonzalez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I appreciate the comments, and so I think what you're seeing, at least on the county level, is that we agree with you. And I don't know what things happened in the past, in 10 years. So I've only been on the board for 2.5 years, but I think you currently have a board that really wants to see additional funds from the general fund go to the roads. And so the last 2 years, we've definitely added more dollars. We added $7 million. Which is about the max we could do. We may not be able to add any this year, but over the next 2 years, we trying to get another 4 or 5 into that roads budget. So I agree with you 100%. I think there's some legal issues on doing that in the current plan, but again, we are looking at doing the PPRTA 3, and if there's some changes we can do in the language, I think you generally supportive of seeing that. But I appreciate the comment. I think it's very important.
Mr. Sonnenberg. And you could just sit up here if you want, unless you want to. Oh, just holding up.
That's an exercise.
Just as a refresher, the phrase maintenance of effort was in the original establishing IGA. It is unenforceable, as we learned from our attorney. But the intent is that, and there's a board policy that established 2004 as the base year. The intent is that everybody should declare their 2004, each of the 5 member governments should declare their maintenance and in the case of City of Colorado Springs Transit funds that they're spending out of their pre-RTA, non-RTA funds in 2004 before the PPRTA started, such that they would not go below that in the future once the PPRTA started up in 2005. So the board established 2004 as the base year for the maintenance of effort for each of the member governments for their non-RTA, pre-RTA funding out of their budgets. At the last board meeting, the board asked me to ask each of the staffs of the 5 member governments to supply their 2018 actual spending on maintenance and, in the case of City of Colorado Springs Transit. So that's in your packet. And again, I have an extra if you don't have yours. On the very back side of the last sheet of paper, I've typed up that 2004 baseline for each of the member governments for maintenance and again, just for city transit. So those are the 2004 numbers. The 2008 actuals are, I've just copied and stapled into your packet for your review. With that, I'll back off and you can continue talking about it.
And I understand Ms. Williams has a comment.
Yeah, I can understand the frustration on the maintenance of effort. One of the things we have in our El Paso County budgeting process is every year we establish a roadmap. So that roadmap is set through 2024 based upon our 2004 maintenance of effort numbers. My hope would be if we decided to revisit the maintenance of effort, that maybe we do it in the next establishing IGA. And so that gives our staff plenty of time to start to make plans to, if we're going to have to change that amount, to budget that in.
Another additional comment towards that end, as you can see with Green Mountain Falls, we clearly don't meet that, and there's a number of things that have happened. I think just immediately thereafter, 2006, 2007, I can't remember those dates correctly, but we did a major restructuring of our town government, and since we've done that restructuring, we've since had staffing changes and restructured how we do our financing. So some of the ways that we account for the same dollars is going to have to take a subjective look rather than a quantitative look because things are not constant. So just anecdotally and from my experience, our effort and the amount that we're putting into roads is far and above beyond what we did prior, but the numbers don't reflect that. So I think we also need to take that into consideration as we move that forward, and I know these bodies have deliberated that, particularly for Green Mountain Falls in the past, but I think that's a great example for where formulas and numbers are less than perfect.
Mr. Godfrey.
Yeah, and Tyler, good point. And I think if I remember back in the years that when the city changed its form of government and we had the recession.
The city of Colorado Springs.
The city of Colorado Springs. They combined organizations. Their whole cost accounting or their methodology and their cost centers and all were consolidated. So they have a issue as well. And if I recollect that you can't compare apples to apples, the funds were not the same now, and this, that, and another. And so I'm sure that Green Mountain Falls is not or I know they're not the only ones that affects. I think during our discussion with this, as I mentioned in the board meeting last month, we kind of, and you guys chime in if I'm misquoting this, but we kind of boiled it down to the nuke option, the unenforceable thing. We got into that. If you don't meet it, you don't get any money. That was kind of the nuke option deal. And the other one was that for communities like Rama, Green Mountain Falls, some kind of 4, 5, 6% or whatever inflationary index would price them out of the business, could potentially price them out of the RTA and the ability to participate. And so we kind of fell along two of those lines, I think. In general, there was a lot of discussion back and forth, but I think that generally, chime in if I missed something there.
If I could. The third option was a reestablishment of a new base year.
Yeah, we couldn't go back to '04 because of legal reasons, and so establishing some future year. But just the fact of an inflationary index added to something, and then the whole question about what index do you use? You know, do you use the Denver Boulder thing? Do you use the one for construction? Do you use the one for labor materials? What index do you use, and how do you taper that for our region for our particular member government? So that was generally some of the discussion that took place.
Yeah, Mr. Williams first, and then Rep.
Brian, and others who've brought it up, I appreciate the interest. Let me at least explain a little bit of what their intent was when we created the RTA.
Sorry, I'm having trouble hearing you.
Sure. Let me get closer, Joan. I sometimes speak softly, and I will try to do better. Our goal in creating the RTA, and the reason for that phrase in the establishing IGA, is so that people knew it wasn't a bait and switch. So unlike, and I'll use CC in comparison, where there's no guarantee that the funding will continue, and I recognize it's not a legally enforceable guarantee, but it's a promise that was made that voters can consider. Our intent was not that, and we promise we'll increase it too. We would have said that if that was there. It was, we will continue to fund it at least at this level. I think when you look at the numbers, and if I'm looking right, I think El Paso this last year spent about $7 million more. Colorado Springs, because of 2C, spent about $52 million more than the promise. And so I think for the RTA to step in and start telling people you need to be increasing your budget on a regular basis really steps out of what the RTA's role is. The city of Colorado Springs has to make budget decisions. El Paso County, Rama, Manitou, Green Mountain Falls, each of them are making budget decisions each year. And I think it's legitimate for the voters of that particular jurisdiction to say, are you increasing funds the way they need to be? And I think you've seen, when you look at the two largest jurisdictions, they've tended to do that when they could. But there was never an intent when it was created that there was a promise it would keep increasing. It was simply, this is not a bait and switch. Do I believe that the member government should fund at a higher level? Yes. But that belief is very different than trying to put something into an IGA, which A, isn't legally enforceable, and B, steps away from what our original goal was in the creation of the RTA, which is to promise, hey, it's not a bait and switch. I am particularly wary knowing that things, and the reason I wouldn't want to ratchet it to current spending levels is because that then penalizes a member government who said, hey, we have some extra money during a good economy, and then say, well, you've got to always maintain that. Well, we all know that sales tax was good in most places in this community. I can't speak for every jurisdiction, but I know the county and cities had good sales tax. They're both at their Tabor max. They're both above it, actually. And so to say, well, you've got to maintain it at that level because that's where you were, that would discourage the government in the future from raising transportation dollars in good years, because then they'd say, oh, we have to be locked into it. I don't want to have to promise this forever, so I won't do it. And that's exactly the opposite of what we ought to be encouraging. To retroactively apply an inflationary adjustment from 15 years before is not what any of the member governments signed up for. And I don't think it's this body's role to tell Colorado Springs, to tell El Paso County or Rama or Green Mountain Falls or Manitou, you need to increase it. I think the voters of those jurisdictions And the leaders of those jurisdictions have that role, but it's not this board's role, it's not our advisory body's role to tell member governments they're supposed to increase, because that exceeds our authority.
Rev, and then Yolanda.
I agree with what Wayne just. I agree with what Wayne just said. Basically, I don't think it's this body's position or prerogative to tell any one of the member governments exactly how they should meet their obligations. And I applaud the original writing of the thing. It's their intent. And the fact that all of the governments, and I speak knowledgeably about the 52 million I agree with, but that's 2C. That's a different tax, and so to speak. And I guess what I'm saying is if for some reason something that the A government has promised to their citizens requires additional funding, they need to go to their voters and find out where to find that money, not by putting an arbitrary whatever baseline you use and say, well, you've got to increase it by 2% this year and 3% next year. I don't think that's right, and I don't think we should have anything to say about it.
Ms. Avila?
Thank you, Chair. I'm in agreement with Brian on what he said. I didn't know that, I didn't read anything about anything being retroactive, so that's not on the table. It's about from here and going forward, and more specifically for PPRTA 3. So we got together as member governments before transportation, and maintenance of effort is fundamental to this. Now, we're not talking a bait and switch or an increase. We're talking cost of living, an attachment. We just talked about in our PPRTA meeting about the cost of bridges that we're looking at. And original costs were like 13 million, 15 million, and now they've gone from up to 25 million and 26 million. And that is due to not looking at the cost of living, the cost of construction. So things are going up. If we do not attach a COLA, cost of living, to the maintenance of effort, in the future, we will have little to no maintenance of effort. And the reason we have to attach it, too, is that anytime there is a downturn or different governments come up, they will be saying, well, where can we cut? Where can we cut? As Colorado Springs did during that recession. It's like, okay, so where's the best place to cut? Oh, I know where. Maintenance of effort. And we won't maintain those roads and bridges and potholes, and we're paying the price for it. And that's why we, did end up with the 2C program. So I think it's crucial. I think it's unfair to say it's a bait and switch. It's out in the open, and I'm looking more for PPRTA 3 to make it. It's not enforceable, and promises are often broken. And so it needs to be, we wouldn't vote for other areas and say, oh, well, we promise, we'll give you X amount of funding. No, I think we need it in there, and it's people. This is the deal with me with transportation in transit. It is the level playing field. It levels the field for businesses, for corporations, but it levels the field for people, the ordinary citizen that needs to get to the doctor, that needs to get to the groceries, that needs to get their kids to school. Maintaining our roads, our bridges, our sidewalks levels the playing field, and it causes the quality of life for all the residents, not just, a few in certain areas. So I think it's crucial to have a benchmark for it, and then add a cost of living. Now, which one we would use as to which factor, I think that we have enough expertise, or people that are experts can decide on which factors will not impact so much, but we can't be left to where it's just not even useless, that it's not going to be effective like in 5, 10, 20, 30 years. So that.
Jim, will you? Yeah, it's your turn.
I want to just lay the record straight here. This was not our initiative. You asked us to look at
right.
this. So I wanted to make that clear. We're not proposing anything that you haven't asked us to do. I just, being that people are stating their opinion, I think it's unreasonable to expect that if we do have an economic downturn, that someone would fully fund transportation and not fund fire and police and other safety items and this kind of thing. That as long as the city is proportional in those kinds of things, given the downturn in the economy. So I would be against something that would require someone to fully fund transportation and an inflationary index when the economy tanks. So and that's what the city did. They had to cut proportionally. And so anyway, so that's my opinion. I just wanted to make clear that we didn't bring this up.
I understand that. All right, Mr. Williams, Tom, then Brian. Go ahead.
Let me talk about if we went down the road. The most directly relevant to what we do is the construction cost index, but that has virtually no relationship to budgets. So if you were doing a different maintenance of effort, maybe you look at percentage of revenues for the entity. So it grows with it. The problem with that is in some cases you get new programs that add new costs, and some of which get reimbursed by grants or other things. So I'm not sure how you do that. And when you look at, as the CAC chair just explained, inflation has usually gone up, even when budgets have gone down. And so you look at what the state did with respect to a requirement that education, K through 12 education funding would increase every year, and they came up with, I don't want to be pejorative, interesting ways to meet the constitutional obligation. But one of those involved gutting transportation funding at the state level, and another of which involved gutting higher ed funding at the state level. So making those budget decisions from us, as opposed to the member governments, you'd have to come up with an interesting formula, and I'm not sure what that formula would be.
Tom, you're next.
Corollary to this, I think, is when we speak about retaining the public trust. I think when we breach the reasonable man approach and we call brand new capital construction maintenance because we don't have any other way to fund it, because it's not on the list, is a problem that we will have to answer for in iteration 3. It not only takes money that was already set aside for projects that were on the list, but it doesn't feel right. We had a lot of discussion within the CAC on that, on some of those issues, and I think it's a very slippery slope. And that's why you saw an initiative come forward from us to get a very finite definition of capital and maintenance, and I know it's been brought up numerous times in the history of the PPRTA, but I think it's something that we have to finally come to grips with, because it is a potential rock in the road for iteration 3 on this issue, because they can look at it and say, well, there was $40 million you spent that wasn't on the list, you know.
Ryan.
I really appreciate the comments, especially from Mr. Williams. But I have to define Wayne, because we have two of them. This really isn't so much about an annual cost of living adjustment as I see it. I think we should kind of narrow it down, because the idea is the 2004 levels are no longer, in my opinion and the opinion of a lot of the people I speak to, realistic expectation, because we are now, 15 years, et cetera, onward in this program, and we know the city of Colorado Springs for 4 or 5 years did not meet the intent that was originally set. And the reason that there was a betrayal felt was that their cuts that caused them not to meet those expectations, the maintenance of effort that was originally set in 2004, while everybody else did, by the way. All the other member governments did. There were other decisions that could have been made. This is, a lot of us see this as an issue of nice-to-haves versus need-to-haves. Transportation is a need-to-have. Fire and police, like Jim mentioned, is a need-to-have. Now, the city of Colorado Springs has a separate tax for their public safety. So they have an additional separate tax already set aside for fire and police. The concern that a lot of us saw during the city, during the downturn, the economic downturn, was that the city was making poor choices with regard to nice-to-haves versus need-to-haves. And this shouldn't be really seen as a punitive. It should be seen as it was originally, as this is a promise to the citizens that we are not going to substitute PPRTA tax dollars for general fund dollars. And that's paraphrasing the original ballot language. So the idea here is to say, okay, we've had a lot of good years. There's been a big change in financial spending and financial accounting since 2004. It's reasonable at this time to update, but we should also put a little bit of teeth into the expectation that if we set a reasonable baseline going forward, like we did in 2004, that there should be some kind of impetus or some kind of encouragement for the member government to actually meet that, rather than as the city of Colorado Springs did at the time, is basically saying it's not enforceable, tough, go jump. That's not fair to the citizens on the whole who pay for the PPRTA. Yes, a large portion of that is the city of Colorado Springs population, but there are, as Ann mentioned, there's a lot of rural taxpayers who pay into this. And when they see the city of Colorado Springs get away with something like that, it creates a little bit of animus. It's like them basically flipping off the rest of the taxpayers.
Let me take this one. I'm going to take this one, and then, no, I'm going to take this one because there's a couple of things that were said in there that I think are very, very important for this board and this advisory committee to think about. First, PPRTA 3, which I'm hoping will be implemented. We haven't begun, I mean, we started to talk about what that looks like. I hope it is broader than just the 5 member governments that we have. I hope that other entities will get involved. I will tell you from me personally and from a lot of other folks, there will have to be a change in the governance of PPRTA 3. And part of the reason for that is Colorado Springs is not getting any more or any less money out of PPRTA than the proportionate representation of its population. Unincorporated El Paso County is getting no more and no less than its proportionate representation. That's true for all 5 member governments. So from City of Colorado Springs perspective, the question is, does the City of Colorado Springs have an incentive, or do the citizens of Colorado Springs have an incentive to enter into an organization where this organization has a disproportionate ability to nix what the city decides it is going to do with its money? And I would say absolutely not. And to echo what Jim says, while this board and this advisory committee may have said that the City of Colorado Springs was making poor choices, while I may or may not personally agree that some of the choices that were being made were good or poor, it was the elected representatives of the city who was making those choices on behalf of the citizens of that county, of that city. And this board should not be in a place to say that those decisions shouldn't be made, that those are not the areas. If, we can disagree, I may disagree that we should have this road as opposed to this park, but if the elected representatives say, no, we need to have this park instead of this road, that's what they're elected to make those decisions for. There's a couple of other things that I would just say is that this discussion is a great discussion to have, but it is broader than within this board. It has to be the IGA between the 5-member governments. You can go ahead and go, and then I'll finish what I'm going to say, because you have to go, you said? Oh, that's right, you do have to go.
Yeah, I do have another board
So Mr.
meeting.
Gonzalez needs to go, and then I'll take it back. I'm going to defer, and I'll take it right back.
And I agree with you, and so I may go into the next topic because I have to leave for another board meeting, I agree with you, and I don't want to be an organization that interferes. And that's why on that one issue that we voted against a couple of months ago, the road dieting, which I think was part of the reason we did want to talk, was like, well, why did we feel that was something controversial and the board didn't, the other board didn't, yeah, sorry, thought it was okay. You just mentioned it. We don't want to be a board that interferes with another group that votes. That group that votes could have voted as a city council to fund that. Instead, they pushed it here. So by pushing it to us, they didn't want to take a vote at the city. They preferred it to get here. And that's why I had it's not part of the PPRTA 2 project list, and it was separate, but you're making me vote on it. In that case, I felt it was proper to say, I don't think that's an appropriate use, because you could have voted for that separately. And in that case, I didn't feel I was stepping on toes, because the city council could have voted on that separately, but it got pushed to us. And so that was my concern there, as well as it not being on the original list. So,
okay,
thanks.
And that's actually a really good segue to the next comment that I was going to make, which is I think we have to recognize how PPRTA has entered into the DNA of the governing entities themselves in the last 15 years. And whether it was originally intended to be this way or not, at least for the city, and I think to a large extent for the county and the other 3 smaller jurisdictions, PPRTA has become part of its governance structure, for lack of a better word. And there are expectations that, okay, we're going to have this amount of money for PPRTA, and from the city standpoint, you got the PPRTA that is going to give us $75 million this year. We've got 2C who's going to give us $52 million. We've got the stormwater fee, which is an impact for this and addresses this. It's going to give us roughly $20 million. So what are we going to do with this pile of money? And we make the decision at that point in time to figure all these things out. The question about maintenance of effort is if we establish the maintenance of effort today, Colorado Springs would have a baseline that is inflated by 2C, inflated a heck of a lot by 2C, and if the voters do not approve the extension of 2C, then all of a sudden we are ripping away police and fire and parks and trees and all of that stuff because we have to maintain the effort for something that the voters are saying they no longer want to do. And I think these are all issues that we need to have a discussion about what does PPRTA 3 look like, because I think it's going to look fundamentally different. I would also say that, yes, it does say Pikes Peak Rural Transportation Authority, but as a practical matter, I think the R is better for regional than rural because there's a lot of urban that addresses this thing as well, too. So, Brian, and then...
Absolutely, and I actually agree with quite a bit of what you said. The reason they went with rural PPRTA is because that's the wording in statutory language. So that if that helps explain why we're rural and not, I prefer regional myself because that's truly what we are. but because of the statutory language.
I did not
we're-
know that. Thank you for educating.
And at the time.
At the, yeah, it's
corrected since.
it has since been changed, but yeah, at the time it was rural. And I agree with you that again, there seems to be this whole idea that this is punitive. This is really to meet citizen expectation, and I don't think anybody on the CAC, I don't remember anybody saying that setting a new baseline year for maintenance of effort would be inclusive of 2C, because that's actually a separate tax that's been instituted by the city. So obviously, there's a lot of analysis that would need to be done on, as Jim and Rep have said, on, and actually Wayne too, on how this would all look about. And this is not a dictatorial kind of a thing where we feel we should be dictating anything. But as citizens, we should be able to question when a member government that I live within the city of Colorado Springs. And I quite often have been very approving of the way the county handles their funds versus how the city handles their funds, but they're two completely different. You're talking about more rural versus a more urban environment. And having served on commissions and committees in both the city and the county, and having gotten to know their processes, I actually think I've given the city a lot of leeway in my opinion of how they handle things. But the one thing that really came out of the whole economic downturn is, like for counties, it's generally accepted that counties were formed for two reasons: law enforcement and roads. That's really why if you go back in history, that's why they exist, counties. Now, there are things that we accept when times are good, that when times get hard, as we do with our own personal budgets, you've got to cut and you've got to readjust. The problem I think most people that I've talked to had was during the last economic downturn, and yes, you're correct, the elected officials are elected and some of them paid the price for things they did and whatever. The decisions that were made, and actually the reason the government was changed in the city was because voters were fed up with the decisions that were being made. The administrative bureaucrats were making decisions that they didn't agree with, so they decided it was time to go with a strong mayor form of government. And it appeared to the citizens that the bureaucracy was being punitive to the citizenry, taking away things that didn't necessarily need to be taken away to punish them for not voting for tax increases. So the whole idea of readjusting the maintenance of effort baseline is, I don't think, again, unreasonable given the amount of time we've looked at. And if we rather look at the idea of how it's formulated going forward, and it can be formulated the same way it was originally, is saying, look, based on what's going on currently and looking at past history, this is what we expect that we should have to make a commitment to the people that we will try to meet in the best way possible. It's just there's still a bad taste from the fact that the leadership of the city at the time basically said, tough, deal with it. We're going to spend our money where we want, which is fine.
Yeah.
But when you're supplementing RTA money for city money, when the RTA is actually giving more money than the general fund was, that's where it really came into.
We'll finish with Mr. Williams, and then we'll go to the next. Oh, and sir, and these two. Okay, Mr. Williams, these two.
They
and
were
then we'll
ahead of me.
finish.
I'm happy.
Oh, were you? Okay, go ahead, Gene. Then the fellow next to Gene, who's Rick, and then Mr. Williams, and then we're done.
I've been involved with citizen input and working traffic issues, starting with East-West Mobility Study. When the CTAB was formed, I was the second longest-serving person on the board when I had to step down, but it was a staggered start, and I don't know whether to say thanks to someone for getting me on the board for that long, or whether to not thank them, but nonetheless, I enjoyed the time. And after a hiatus, I came back and got involved again with the CAC. During the discussions about the original PPRTA 2, one of the items that I brought up is that you needed to have a fixed baseline for the maintenance of effort. I have been around long enough to know that the first time there was an economic downturn, the city would pull funds out of transit and maintenance, which is exactly what they did. I'm not going to debate the reasons why, because I don't have enough information to do so, but I knew how governments and how things worked. I'm also very sensitive to the comment that Dennis made earlier. Anything to set a baseline that is applicable to all of the member governments is a case of one size fits all, and that's certainly not the case. The issues that the smaller towns face are significantly different than the county faces and the city faces, City of Colorado Springs. If we attempt to set some baseline, then we're going to have to find a way to do so that accommodates the needs of the smaller participants and is not punitive on them. Otherwise, there's no reason for them to join. Likewise, inflation. If we deal with inflation, and I felt like at the time that we were discussing the original PPRTA, there needed to be an inflationary item in there. But your comments are making me rethink my positions of 15 years ago. Nonetheless, there should be a way that we can come up with adjustments to account for inflation that work for the county, work for the city of Colorado Springs, and don't penalize you to the point where you say, why should I be here? I don't gain enough. The problem with that is that it gets complicated in a hurry. The voters will probably not understand the reason, let alone the detail, and very frequently voters will say, if I don't understand it, the answer is no, which is another compounding problem. One last comment very briefly. Like in everything, devil's in the details. When the city came in and started addressing their baseline level of effort for the original CTAB, they excluded funding for streets maintenance that was contained in the SIP portion of the budget. The board approved it. And by the board, I mean the PPRTA board approved doing that. I do believe that that was a bad decision, because there was money directly in the SIP budget that funded street maintenance, and we excluded it from level of effort, and it's continued to be excluded since. Whether there's other areas like that pertinent to transportation or things that I've missed in the maintenance side, I'm not certain, but it needs to be looked at.
Thank you. Rick?
I think that this whole issue has been a topic of conversation. I have to disagree about bad taste, because I don't know that there's that many people left with a bad taste on it. But that aside, the only thing in common that we all have in this is the RTA. So if we're going to create a maintenance of effort, it has to be based on solely the participating members' portion of the RTA. You can't take 2C in, you can't take 3C in, you can't take skip in, you can't take any of them in, because that doesn't pertain to REMA. It doesn't pertain to El Paso County. It doesn't it pertain to anybody the Colorado Springs. So the only thing we have in common is the RTA. So if we're going to establish a maintenance of effort, it has to be based totally on an individual decision by the governance of this board based on our own interests and our own calculations of a person's participation. Thank you.
Wayne.
Let me,
And then Wayne and then Tyler. Okay.
let me address a couple of things. The legislature at the time defined anything outside of Denver as rural. So just like
There you go. Okay.
vacant land is blighted, El Paso was rural. And so that's why it was there. Second, there were other factors. Brian?
He's gone.
He's gone. And as part of one of those factors, the county adjusted its mill rate to bring its road and bridge tax in proportion to what other counties do. The impact of that cost City of Colorado Springs money. So the City of Colorado Springs wasn't acting alone in the process. 3, inflation's been, this is the national average, 35.8%. So you'd be talking, El Paso County would be needing to fund an extra $5 million a year above the maintenance of effort. City of Colorado Springs would be $8 million above, $2 million of which is in transit, $6 million in the rest of it. And if you look at the numbers there, we're still at around the 18 and some million. So that would be a significant change if we were trying to reset a baseline. Fourth, putting the RTA together involved a number of compromises. And other jurisdictions tried. And the city of Fort Collins nixed at the last second a deal that the Northern Front Range had. That meant that not every jurisdiction got what they wanted. Fountain, for example, wanted to say that they get to be chair of the RTA, and one of the compromises was made is that the chair and vice chair alternate between the two larger jurisdictions. While my colleague has advocated for significant changes in the governing structure, I would be very wary of that. This has been a very successful process. So successful that the renewal last time was at 79.5%. Does it chafe occasionally to have to go through a review? Sure. But, as was pointed out by Commissioner Gonzalez, the jurisdictions are still free to fund other projects that aren't accepted by this board with their own money. But that check and balance was part of what has made this project work and why it's been successful. The efforts of our Citizens Advisory Committee have been a large part of that. I would be very wary of trying to change something that I think has worked extraordinarily well and has been the envy of other jurisdictions wherever I go in the state of Colorado, because occasionally it doesn't work out just the way we want it. So I respect the frustration that has happened occasionally, but I think it works, and I think it is an appropriate model. And
voiceover on 3:59 p.m. Portrait.
Sorry.
Since Yolanda's telling me it's time to be quiet at 3:59, but that's my point. Since we got into that other broader area, I think as we talk about it, do we want to encourage other jurisdictions to join if they can? Absolutely. We've done that. RAMA joined in the last time. Could a RAMA project be vetoed because they've only got one vote out of the 9? Absolutely. But I think overall this has worked really well, even if every government doesn't get everything they want, even if there is occasionally frustration with the maintenance of effort. And yes, it was advisory because it's not legally enforceable, but part of it is the elected representatives are accountable to their respective electorates. And so the people of Colorado Springs can say, I think this is wrong, I'm going to get city council members who will do that. Or they can say, hey, that was an economic downturn. In the overall scheme of things, that's not something I'm going to be so upset with. And remember that it was during that time in part that the 79.5% renewal occurred. So those are my long-winded comments.
Tyler?
Really, buttressing those comments, I think that the intent was very clear when we originally wrote this and pulled this together, and that's really what comes before us today, and I think that's the reason that we are all debating, discussing, and thinking about these things. And to have something formulaic would really mean that we don't need to be sitting around the table discussing this. It's the subjectivity of these considerations and whether we feel that a particular entity is or is not meeting the maintenance of effort that we need to discuss and debate and determine and deliberate on and ultimately make some sort of determination. And what the consequence of the determination is really advisory, and it's really advisory to the electorate. It's not something that we should be taking punitive action on. The RTA was really designed as a funding mechanism for the member entities, not a way to wag the dog by the tail kind of situation, and it's important for us to be advisory. And if there are issues and we have concerns as a CAC and ultimately as a board, that should be highlighted to the electorate and carry that forward. But that's where that subjectivity, and that's why we are paid the huge dollars as advisory board members and board members to sit around this table and think about these things. We're presented with the information. We have to think about that and take those things into consideration. And so I think with that, it's important for us to look at why we're here and why we have the CAC and the board to think about these things and consider it. And I think it is very important for us to continue to think about that. And I hesitate to figure out some mathematical way that is going to be binary that we can say, oh, no, you've surpassed this threshold, therefore you're in violation. No, this is really a concept, and if we feel that that concept is not being met by that member entity, then it's our job to highlight that and identify that, and for voters to then take appropriate action as they see fit. And I think that there are always going to be considerations, and I think that's one of the things that we need to be vigilant of as a body, is how that happens. So I think I generally agree with that rural gateway to Green Mountain Falls called Colorado Springs. That's really the case.
Yeah.
Isn't that the truth?
And that rural gateway. Yes. The only thing that I would say to Mr. Williams is I would love, and I think I saw a lot of nodding heads, wouldn't it be great to have Fountain and Monument and Calhan and maybe Teller County? If we do that, then obviously we're going to have to address the question of governance.
And we also do need to address the chair issue, because we are bitter about that.
We should be bitter. We've gone an hour on that issue. I would like to spend an hour on the question of the program of funds at Colorado Springs. Are you guys okay? Do you want to take about a 5-minute break before we get into that, or do you want to just get into that? It looks like we're getting right into it. Yes, Carlos.
Yeah, Carlos Perez. I just wanted to summarize then, since we're going to be moving on to the other topic. Is there any specific action that you want the Citizen Advisory Committee to review? There's various options. The recommendation was status quo, no changes.
I think we're kind of stuck with status quo until we get a question to the IGA, with the IGA. And my feeling personally is, since we're going to be dealing with a PPRTA 3, that would be the time to do that. To invest the political capital now for the remainder of PPRTA 2, I don't think is particularly productive. And it looks like that's the sense. So I think you guys can certainly talk about it and give us recommendations as we go on. Let's go ahead and get into the question about the program funds. I noticed a lot of you were here because your attendance was so good. You were here when Mike was presenting the program fund presentation at the last CAC meeting, and I noticed a lot of you guys were here this morning. Does anybody want to have him go through that? Yeah, Jim.
Yeah, I'd like to kind of kick it off, if I will, if you will. I think some of the concerns, at least in my mind, and those that were at the board meeting and have listened to that, Wayne, when you made your comment or during the actions where they refused the line item transfer into program funds for Van Buren. And then 10 minutes later, they did approve a line item transfer into programs funds for a much larger amount for different things. And the votes, we've been overridden before, and that's fine, that's your prerogative, and we make a recommendation. But those two votes were overwhelmingly supportive of the CAC, and then to have the large number of board members vote against that at least sent a signal to me. And then discussions about program funds meeting or exceeding their expected budget and this kind of stuff. And so I think that from my perspective as chair, and I've discussed this with the whole CAC, we're not sure where to go. Is the board changing what you want us to look at in terms of how we approach, discuss, and approve funding and issues around these program funds? And if so, that's, I guess we would like to know what that guidance is. As part of that, in trying to understand that, as I mentioned in the board meeting, very few of us had insight into the level of detail that you saw today and that we've seen over the last couple of months from the city into these funds. As I've said openly, I'm not sure there's many of us sitting around this table that haven't questioned what's in these funds at one point in time over time, and whether or not they were being managed properly and whether they had a plan and this kind of stuff. So we hadn't done that. And so we've now done that. I'm not saying this is the final answer. I think this is a good first step in terms of understanding what these programs are and how they fit in. I think knowing this information and what the plan was and what the plan is going forward and seeing this will help us and inform us in making recommendations for the board. But I think that from my perspective and the CAC, we're not sure where you want us to go regarding program funds. Maybe it's nowhere. But if we need to change our direction and how you want us to look at these and things as we've got budget deliberations and things coming up, I think it would be useful to know. So that kind of kicking off some of the issues I think that we have within the CAC.
Does anybody else, any other members of the CAC have any other clarification other than what Mr. Godfrey said? All right. I'm going to I'm going to direct the question to Mr. Williams, to Mr. Carpenter, and to Tyler, because I voted for that program. You've heard from Mr. Gonzalez what Mr. Gonzalez said. I think it's fairest to hear from the people who voted against it first. So whichever one of you three wants to talk about it. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but okay, Mr. Williams.
I'm fine. Here's the general premise of the Pikes Peak RTA, and this has been true for both incarnations, is we're going to do this category of projects first, and then if there are extra funds, we're going to do this second category. Pikes Peak RTA 1 was an optimistic forecast, and Category A was a 90%. Frankly, absent the $35 million we got from the feds, we would not have gotten it done. And so when RTA 2 came forward, we went with a more reasonable 75%. I would say that, and this is a discussion I've had ongoing with city and county as we prepare for Category 3, or the second renewal, however you want to call it, that we need to strive to be better on our estimates. And I think that may be an appropriate source of that extra administrative funds that we've not been using. Pikes Peak RTA was created with a 1% administrative cap. I think planning for the future might be an appropriate thing to use that so we get some better engineering done. Kind of like the city did with stormwater, where we had closer estimates. Not perfect, because you never know how big that landfill is underneath something. So that's, having said that, to the extent we continue to increase any of the projects above the original estimate, we run the risk of getting fewer of the Category B projects done. And while I understood why we hit the 90% level and not the 100% for Pikes Peak RTA 1, I think it's very important that we not use up all of the money and we barely hit the 75% level. So particularly when it's talking about transfer of funds, and let me distinguish two types of transfers. There's a transfer from Project A to Project B because Project B is ready to go and Project A isn't, and then you're going to transfer the money back from B to A. That's absolutely appropriate. It's what we should be doing. One of them is ready to go, one's not. Let's get the project done that's ready to go. That's very different from transferring from Category A to Category B, and B's never going to pay it back, which is what the particular proposal was.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Yes.
No, it wasn't.
It was, because there's no money left in B based on the original.
We're talking
estimate.
about Link Road.
No, we're talking just in
Marino.
This had to do with Van Buren and moving from a A-list project into safe streets and safe sidewalks.
Right.
A project into a B project that was already fully budgeted.
No.
And that is, when you look at the original estimate for how much money would go in, those category projects totaled $26 million, and the amount that had been spent, according to the presentation we had that day, was $41 million when you add those together. So over. Question is, how much more over do you want to go? Because every project that you do ultimately cuts into the number of B projects that you can get done. So to what extent, we have cost overruns in lots of places. We have budget overruns in lots of places. Some of those are because we had bad estimates to start with. Where you have a project that you say you're going to do, so I'll pick Circle Drive since that was in front of us before, the Circle Bridges. I think the original estimate was about $13 million. We were told today it's going to be about $25 million. But that's a project that we said we're actually going to get done, and that's a promise to the voters. And so if the cost is more, the cost is more. We're going to try and be as frugal as we can, but we've got to get the project done. Where we have more ephemeral projects that are not specifically defined as this is what we're going to get done, the concern is if we go over, we're taking money away from project category B projects that in 2023, 2024, and if you go with the original 75% estimate, 2022, we would be doing. And so the issue is, how many more can you do within that? And based on the information that was presented to us, it was ultimately taking it away because there was no plan to backfill back into, I think it was the South Academy project from this. It would just be new additional funds would go into South Academy as opposed to transferring it back from the broader categories. So I guess from my perspective, what I want CAC to do, and this is me speaking, is to look at the projects from a sense of how much more is there within that original estimate, and what is that impact on Category B? Because the Category B projects also include the ephemeral projects or the broad category projects. And those are in both A and B. And so the discussion of what B projects get prioritized is something this board has to do, and the member governments frankly have to do. Because there are many more Category B projects than will get done. And there are those who believe some of them are incredibly important to the economic prosperity of the community, to safety, to a host of things. And so the purpose of your review, at least from this board member's perspective, is to give your guidance on where you think that should weigh. It's guidance. And the feeling, I think, of the majority of the board at that time was that given the fact that 15 more million had been allocated to the broad categories than the original budget amount, there was a concern that that's cutting into the Category B projects. And that's at least was my perspective. There are other ones that had already been approved as a project to be done within that broad category. And so a transfer to do a project that had been approved because additional money was needed is a very different thing than taking on another project that had not yet been approved. So that's how those were distinguished, in at least my mind.
Jim, you go ahead.
No,
Yeah.
I was going to say that if we were to extend that premise of we don't fund a project beyond its original estimate.
It's not what I said.
I think you.
Two very different things between a
No, that-
project that has defined scope, as in Circle Bridges, versus one that doesn't have a defined scope.
But I think we're finding that these do have defined scopes. Based on this, we just didn't have visibility of that prior to this.
Jim, the ballot issue did not define a scope for it. That's what that adherence to the ballot issue, which clearly said we're going to build the Circle Bridges, is very different than saying we promised 26 million on broad categories and we've spent 41 on them.
And I'm just looking at the estimate now. Citywide congestion and incident management, signal improvement, intersection improvements, roadway safety, traffic operations and maintenance, all of those are included in the ballot estimate. And the question is whether these fall within that or not. I mean, are they a defined particular project at this intersection? No, but the general stuff is included in
It's
here.
included in there at a dollar amount.
But I think the more important distinction that we're running into is that both those categories are listed on both A and B list, and where's that definition of when we transition from A to B? While there may be a defined list of what is on that overall category, my question is, when can we check off that we've done the A category of those programmatic activities, and we are now moving into B of those programmatic activities? And that's where I don't see any definition. It is just we've got to keep going until we get these things done. And my suggestion is we will continue to debate and discuss this, but more importantly, for RTA 3, these programmatic activities need to have dollar bucket amounts that once we, not to exceed amounts, so that we know that, okay, you've got flexibility to be able to achieve these goals and these needs, but then once that dollar amount is spent, and however that's needed to be spent to achieve those goals and those objectives, then we can check that off and we've got that done. Because right now, it's an open-ended, and we are struggling to sort of say, when is that checkoff done, so we can move on to the B-list projects.
And it very much is...
No, Scott's hand is raised.
Well,
What Mike had explained, and I know this from having helped manage some of the RTA projects back during RTA 1, the assumption on the city's hand is that there's a set amount of each year's budget that goes to those programs, and the intent is that those will get funded every year. You're never going to run out of projects that need to have, you're never going to run out of signals that need to be rebuilt or sidewalks that need to be reconstructed. So the city's intent has been that there's a set amount that will go into those program categories every year, and each year they'll go through their list of needs and figure out which of those projects get those funds for that year. And so to think that, well, the bucket that was lowered to 70% of what they think they're going to get, and once you hit that, then no more goes into those program funds till the end of the list. It's a change in mindset from what the city had intended, in my opinion.
And then Jim, I think, oh, Rev, and then Richard.
I happen to think that the city needs the flexibility, and I would like to remind everybody, there is not a dollar amount on any of those items, but it is set by the board's approval in a budget. But even the budget, for the sake of discussion, says it's $8 million. It's planned to continue on and try to keep out of the B-list items. Just now, if you look at Mike's under the emergency bridge, he's taken some items that are on the B-list that make good economic sense. But what happens is everybody looks at it from a big picture and says, oh, that's a B-list. We don't do it yet. We've got to finish the A-list. I think that's one of the issues that I spoke with Tyler earlier, earlier, that they will address in PPRTA 3, something that is definitive because you as a voter, not as Tyler, but as a voter, you look at me, circle, drive bridges. Quite frankly, I never noticed it until, thank you, Karen pointed out that they were four separate bridges, eastbound, westbound, two sides. Two covers. And I think everybody's I think the CAC was a little upset that we approved it and we saw it differently than the board did that day. And basically we're looking to look at what you want us to give you, what we're supposed to look at, or whether we made a mistake or judged a mistake.
I wouldn't use the word upset, okay? You make the decisions, and we live with those. We make a recommendation, you make the decisions. Our job is not that. So we weren't upset. I think we were a little bit confused. And so looking at a plan that the city has provided, they've shown that all of the remaining A-list projects, not in general category funds, should be, for the most part, fully funded by the end of 2023, with one project carried over into 2024. So if we stop funding the program funds because they've exceeded a 7-year-old estimate that was incomplete at that time, I'm just not sure how much. What do they do if they need to put sidewalks in, or if they need to rehab an intersection because we lost signals, or this, that, another? And so do we just funnel all that into A-list and we finish in 2022? Is that physically possible? Can that get done? And then, oh, by the way, it's not just the city. Before anybody can go to a B-list, the county's got to finish their list too.
Never mind.
And so if the city finishes all of their A-list projects and the county doesn't finish their A-list projects until 2023, we still can't go to B-list. So that's where I'm confused.
I don't think we'll ever have a clean break, that we will be able to say, okay, we are done with A, now we shall move on with B.
We didn't in
There's
RTA
going to
1.
have to be an overlap, and there's going to have to be a coordination, and I guess I'm pushing us to, at some point, check off the A-list programmatic stuff and move on to the B-list programmatic stuff while we simultaneously finish the A-list capital. because we've got to be able to project out and say, we're going to achieve these things, and at some point we say, okay, if we're down in the B list, starting the programmatic stuff, let's start chunking away at the B list. And now we need to make the decision that we're optimistic that we're going to get into the B list and start prioritizing and start spending out of it.
But we can't legally spend B-list money on B-list projects till all A-list items are funded.
And the city.
And not only the
cannot
city,
do
but the county as well.
B-list
All of
until
them is
all A-list are done by all 5.
And so we could potentially be sitting here with $40 million sitting in the pot and can't do anything about it until somebody else finishes their A-list.
Not finished, fund.
You're correct.
So that's where I'm going. Get them funded, which means allocating the dollars that we anticipate coming in, get them budgeted, and say, these are now funded, let's move forward.
And does this not do this from the city's perspective? It certainly shows intent, and not knowing that these cost estimates may or may not change, and I'm sure they will. I would venture a guess to say that there's probably very few projects on this original estimate list that hasn't changed. I mean, you look at the Academy over Cottonwood, you look at North Colorado Avenue, West Colorado Avenue. So if we try to, I just want to make it clear that we're operating on the principle that everybody's A-list has to be done before anybody's B-list can be done. Funded, correct. I stand corrected. I stand corrected. You're absolutely right. So that's where I guess we got a budget process coming up. And I think that in fairness to us in the city, as we're going through reviewing and digging into this thing, if the city comes forward with a couple of $100,000 in one of their funds and it exceeds their 7-year-old estimate, do we say no? I guess that's where we're coming from.
Wayne and then Brian.
Let me tell you what one of the triggers is. I got on this board, and I looked at the annual report, and the annual report showed 7 RTA projects complete out of 60-some, despite the fact we're over halfway through.
Are funded?
I'm talking county and city. 7 complete, done. And I believe, and I've talked to the government I'm a part of, to Travis and Mike, about the need to prioritize getting projects done. Because if we go to the voters, please renew this, and by the way, here are the 7 of the 60-some projects we got done, we're going to get killed. And so there is a push from me to make sure that we get those A projects that are listed, things like Circle, things like Academy, done. You talk about a project that, and let me just pick one. Roadway safety, the original estimate's $8 million. We've spent $17 million. And we're planning $1 million budget each year. How does that even work? And so, if the general estimate and division was $8 million for this, we can't possibly plan to spend $1 million every year and get to $8 million over a 10-year process. The math just doesn't work. You ask how we do something if something comes up. The city has $18 million we spend as part of our maintenance of effort. It's not like we have 0 other funds. And so I look at the absolute necessity that we need to get Category A projects that are listed and specified done. And we could mark this one as done, having spent twice as much as we said we're going to spend, according to the budget process that I'm looking here. But that's my concern, is an annual report that was produced before I joined the board that shows virtually no projects complete, despite the fact over half the time period of the RTA has been accomplished. And for me, as someone who plans to support the renewal of the RTA, who plans to campaign for it, who plans to raise money for it, as someone who's already begun those discussions with entities that will help fund that campaign, we have to be able to show a significant number of those A projects. And to the extent we keep diverting money from A-list specified projects to this, it's a concern. Doesn't mean it can't ever be done, but it means that it's something that I want you to weigh in on to say, is this appropriate?
And Tyler needs to go. I'm going to say something real quickly. If that is the way that you evaluate the success of the PPRTA, then the PPRTA is not successful. The fact of the matter is, Colorado Springs has presented a document showing that its A-lists are funded and anticipating being funded and completed, the identified A-list projects. The $8 million estimate resulting in $17 million, I would just ask you to look at page 2, where the West Colorado reconstruction was estimated at $8.6 million. We are now at $35 million, give or take. And so you look at estimates of what was done 15 years ago and say that that's taking money away. It's not. Colorado Springs has done what it's supposed to do. I told you, Tyler, I'm going to give you a chance to talk if you wanted to talk before you leave, because I see you're all packed up. And then we're going to go to you, Brian.
Just real quickly to reiterate, I think that the real push is for us to figure out when we're going to make that switch to start flowing in a different color ink into that matrix of B money. And that's where I'm pushing. I think we're at the precipice, and I'm just pushing us to push us over the edge and say, yeah, in 2020 we're going to start looking at B-list projects. I think in my head we need to stop funding the programmatic ongoing activities in the A-list and move those to B-list and start chunking away at the B-list, because we do have a plan for how we're going to fund the A-list projects and start figuring that out so we can start getting these projects out the door.
Right. Brian, then Carlos.
The interesting thing here is as often happens, I'm torn because I see both sides, and I really, as I've been described as a fiscal hawk, to some people, Genghis Khan. I really appreciate the desire for accountability and being able to be fiscally responsible. However, as this has happened in the past, if a member entity comes to us and presents a reasonable and well-considered argument for being able to move funds and, of course, provide, there's a lot of provisos.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we spend a tremendous amount of time on the CAC evaluating and really grilling, and I give the folks who come here every month and represent the member governments, I mean, a lot of times they catch a lot of heat from us and they get grilled, but that's because we're doing the digging down and the due diligence to make sure that, and there's a lot of us who are very passionate about the fact that our taxpayer money be spent properly, and that we can justify to the citizens when we go back to them for an RTA 2 or an RTA 3 that it's been managed properly and it's been managed carefully. I think in this particular case, there seems to be a disconnect between, and I'm trying to figure out a nice way of saying it. I don't think we should be overwhelmingly concerned with renewal. I think we should be more concerned about, are we making a responsible use of monies now, and can we make that argument to the government or to the people? And I think as a whole, we obviously don't always agree on everything, but we can, even when we disagree, we can usually come to a compromise or a collegial agreement on most things. And when we present those to you, it's important for us as boards in the past, because the boards tend to change more often than our membership does. It's important to us to know that you understand that we've really dug into a lot of this. And there's a lot of talent and knowledge here. Now, we're not elected officials, we're appointed, but the reason we're appointed is to, use experience and knowledge, and we hash these things out to try and make it a little bit easier for the board as elected officials to make your decisions based on recommendations. And when we see something like this, it's important to us to understand your thoughts on why you voted against something, but it's also important for us to maybe tell you and get to you our process and what we really go through hours and hours every month, and the research that we do to try and make this a equitable process for the voters and a reasonable, responsible expenditure of taxpayer funds.
Thank you. Carlos, then Tom.
Yeah, Carlos Perez, alternate. I'm just trying to, these are going to be more clarifying questions. I have the ballot measure in front of me. I'm reading it or reviewing it. I always go back and review the ballot measure. The A projects is an alphabetized list. It does not, in the ballot language, imply, expressed or implied, a particular priority of the capital A list items. So when we talk about the pedestrian improvements and the signal improvements and safety and roadway, it's just an alphabetized list. And so what I hear is that the direction from the board is that we want to start prioritizing within the A list that is not in the implied or explicit language of the ballot measure. And I just wanted to, or at least I hear that, and just it's a clarifying question, because the sense is that perhaps some of these, how we're allocating funds within the A list is operating in a way that's detrimental to the B list. In other words, we're slowing down things. That's what I heard Mr. Stevens say. And I don't think anybody in the CAC wants to do that. I think we would love to be able to do all these things. And so this idea that we're going to be funding things from the A list that is going to slow things down is something I don't think anybody wants to do. So again, I'm just trying to clarify these program items versus named items. The ballot does not say that, but should we be making some sort of distinction of the generic, I call them the generic items, which I know has built a very poor reputation for being a slush fund. That's the feeling. And it's not intended to be that way, but it sometimes looks that way. And I don't think anybody wants that. But I'm just trying to understand for the people who, or for those on the board, is it the direction, because I'm still confused. If, to me, the ballot is does not say pedestrian improvements is higher or lower priority than the Milton Proby project. We're always juggling money around, and we're trying to do the best and make sure that when things are shovel ready, we get to them. So that's just really, I'm just trying to understand is how these named projects and these generic program categories, are we supposed to be evaluating those when it comes to line item transfers or funding for budget? Is there a different criteria? And I just want to make it very clear, it's not in the ballot language.
From my perspective, there is no different criteria. An A-list item is an A-list item. From my perspective, there is no different criteria. The pedestrian safety questions that existed in 2004 clearly are not the pedestrian safety questions that exist in 2019. And that's just a factor of the growth of Colorado Springs, the growth of the community, the growth of El Paso County, things that we could not anticipate in 2004 are being addressed in 2019. So for me, there is no program distinction. Wayne?
It's not a program distinction, there's a budget distinction. And so if you're over budget, then, particularly if you're more than double the budget, then I start looking very skeptically, saying, what are there? Are there some named projects that were specific? Yeah. I mean, I look at the biggest one, I think percentage-wise, is Academy over Cottonwood Creek, that we estimated at 1.2 million, and it wound up being 8.1 million. So we're off by a lot. I think so for me, when a project is funded, it's met that criteria, then I look at it differently than a project that's not complete, because there's no way to define the category projects as complete except by the dollar cost. And so that for me is the distinction. There are some of those that are complete in terms of the promised funding, and since no specifics were listed, I view that differently than something that's specifically promised.
Tom?
I'm sorry, is it estimated budget versus actual budget this
Yeah,
year?
he's referring to the estimate in '24. Tom, Carlos, Jim.
We in the CAC share your concern about completions. Completions, commencement are two totally different things, and one of the concerns we have is that so few at halfway through this iteration of PPRTA have even commenced, and the contractor community out there is not elastic without paying a huge penalty. If we decide to fund but not actually start a lot of these things, they're going to extend for years and years and years after this PPRTA is done, and the voters will not make a distinction between not commenced and funded. They won't frankly care. And we don't understand why we can be 5 years into this and have only 8 done also. So few have even commenced. Some projects seem to take 5, 6, 7 years in the thinking process before the first shovel hits the ground, and it's very concerning. And we're struggling with it, like you are.
And who I said, Carlos, Jim, and then Travis wants to make a comment.
Again, I'm just trying to understand the direction from the board as to how, again, I don't think I don't want to, repeating myself here, we don't want to be operating detrimentally to any of the named projects here. If I understand it correctly, though, we are to consider these program categories in a different way than the named projects. The named projects do have it's a named project. It has an end. We know when we're finished with it, whereas the pedestrian improvements, and I did ask Mr. Chavez there this question specifically, is the phase 1 and the A list, are they really kind of one and the same? The answer is yes. The intent is that this is funded throughout, like Mr. Barnhart, he had to reiterate what he said, that it is funded through the entire 10-year cycle. My concern is that the board is asking that we have a drop-off in funding of the generic program categories because we are off by our estimates. I will make a note factually that our generic programs are about 18% of our capital projects. 78% is our named projects. So I'm not quite to the point where I see these generic programs, even though they are, if you want to look at it, off by their original budget, are operating detrimentally. I'm just not there. That we're slowing things down on the named projects, considering the relationship. I mean, if the named projects were, if the generic categories was 80% of the budget, then I would be concerned. But it being less than 20, I just don't see it as being slowing things down. The other concern, the second concern I have was within the generic programs themselves, the line item transfer was $200,000, and it was considered, no, we can't do that because we got B projects to fund. Another generic program category got funded, same line item transfer, $3.2 million, and everything is okay. Does the board understand the confusion that causes, that within the generic program categories, one is okay to fund from a line item transfer, and another one is not okay? And if you look at it purely from just a spreadsheet, from a numbers perspective, 3.2 versus 200,000, 3.2 is 16 times 200,000. So it's not logical. And so we're just, perhaps, maybe I'm reading too much into it, but I just wanted clarification on what I call the discrepancy, where one line item transfer is okay and another one's not, and they go into the generic program categories. And if the guidance is that we look at it on a case-by-case basis, that may be the guidance. But I don't know how I would recommend anything differently, given the information I've been provided here.
Thank you. Jim, Travis?
Yeah, I just, Wayne, I sometimes the devil's in the details, but let's just look at page 3 of the handout you had today at the RTA with the program funds. If you look at roadway safety and traffic ops, you talked about the $12 million that they spent, which is over the budget. 11.4 of that was board-directed projects, of which almost $7 million of that was CDOT payments for agreements that were signed back when they built Cimarron for the ramp project, some landscaping and some of that. Another $1 million was for the Spine Road, which we didn't necessarily agree with. And then there was $3.6 million for Sierra Madre Vermejo, so that were all directed by the board that go into that thing. So, you know, you've got to kind of think that this wasn't necessarily the projects that they had originally planned on in their budget and looking for roadway safety and traffic ops. But that's where the money went. The board approved those transfers into those things. So I just point out that it's not just the number. There's some details behind some of those numbers, and in some cases, like in the CDOT MOAs, we had I don't remember where Old Ranch Road came in, but we had, when we built those bridges, we had 3 years of $1 million apiece or something. We had to pay CDOT back for that stuff, which comes out of some of these things too, because it wasn't a named project. So there are some more details behind some of this, and so I just wanted to point that out.
Travis?
Oh, it was? Oh, sorry, Mike, stand corrected.
Travis, then Wayne.
Thank you, Dave. Travis Easton, Public Works Director for the city. First, I just want to frame this in a way that I don't want to lose sight of it. These are good discussions. I mean, it's not as if the city is using the program funds to buy office space or chairs or staff a bunch of people. These are all good projects that have been beneficial to the community, I believe. So I think this is a good discussion. These are good problems to have, if you will. There's been discussion about, I think, Wayne, you might have mentioned, the only way to judge the completion of the programs is the money that's spent. One way that I think maybe the city could do a better job is annually list the projects that we plan to do with those program funds. I set up the 2C program with our good folks at the city. We plan that out every year, and it's a program. And every quarter, I don't think any of you are on the 2C committee. Every quarter, I report to the 2C committee % spent and % complete. You only have half the story if you're only reporting on one of them. So I would just offer that as a way that I think might help bridge the gap in some of the understanding here today. Is the city can do that on an annual basis, just submit the set of projects we're going to do with those programs.
And if I'm not mistaken, Mike, that's what one of the documents we talked about presenting quarterly is to allow us to do that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
because the programs we plan on doing are at the budget.
Right.
Yeah. And the last comment, I will stress the importance of the flexibility. You know, I was called to a meeting in this very room, I think it was 6 days ago, with a bunch of people from Peterson Air Force Base that need improvements to their North Gate. And I think most of you are aware of Space Command and the importance of getting that here. I think, Wayne, you might have been at the ceremony earlier this week or late last week for them as well. Stuff comes up that is unforeseen. And, it was very candid conversation last week in this room. How can we work together to fund this? County didn't have any money. I don't have any discretionary money within the city general fund budget. This program would be the only way, or these programs would be the only way that we could fund something like that for Peterson at their North Gate to, again, benefit the entire community by helping to show that we are investing in gate improvements for their infrastructure to hopefully, get the Pentagon to decide to permanently locate Space Command here. So again, beneficial projects for the community. I just offer that as a solution that maybe help bridge the gap. So,
I appreciate that, and Travis, thank you. And these are the type of discussions that I think we need to have. I said it before, but let me just reiterate. There is a difference between a new project, which is what was turned down, and a cost increase in an already approved project, which was the other project. So those were two very different types of things. And I am. And I don't remember the exact numbers, but the one that was approved was a cost increase on an existing project. So those, at least for me, are very different things. We're partway through a project, and we have an unforeseen railroad issue, which I think was a large part of that. That's different than, and should we take on this other project as well? With respect, Jim, to the board-directed projects, the city came forward with various additional projects. The city approved those. This board approved those. I don't remember whether CAC approved them as well. But that's all part of a discussion, just like Peterson will be, to say, okay, we are beyond the original budget, and what I'm saying is, in that case, we should look a little more questioning at it, and it may be that ultimately the city, the CAC, and the board say, this project is worthwhile of exceeding the budget because of the other impacts that are there. But when we take on a new project, after we've achieved the budget amount, then I look at it differently. Can it meet that criteria still? Absolutely. But that's, I think, where we look at it, at least the majority of the board that day. I am not saying that every project is going to be exactly the same. And that's why it's not a computerized answer that you plug in, and I can't give you the specificity of plug in factors A, B, and C, and you'll get the answer as D always, because there's a number of other factors that I think we look at. But that, for me, is the distinction. And I'm not saying, I'm not saying any category has more value than another, but I'm saying once a category is complete by at least one means, then we need to look at, if we're going to add some more stuff into it, is there a sufficient reason to do that, knowing that that impacts our ability to complete 25% of the projects being Category B projects. I think we've already written off that we're not going to meet that 25%. We're down to maybe 20, maybe 18% based on the money that's left. We just have to be careful that we don't continue to cut into it so much that nothing gets done.
And I'd just like to, if I just follow up real quick, I feel like, I understand what you're saying, but I feel like that you are applying a different definition to these projects when you say they exceed their budget, because it was never meant to be the 10-year budget. It was never intended to be that. But you're now defining it as that. And so their numbers are wrong the minute they put them down, because they never intended it to be a 10-year budget. And so that's where I have a little bit of consternation with how you are now defining a 7-year-old estimate. And I'm just struggling. I want to support you. We're here to do what you guys want us to do.
So
but I'm struggling with that.
It's not. The original presumption was Category A is about 7 years. So when you call it a 10-year budget, it's not a 10-year budget, because those last 2 years are in Category B.
And I know Mike has a presentation to make, and it's Rick, right, Rick? And I'm going to apologize already. I have a 6 o'clock appointment on the north side of town, so I'm going to have to leave in about 10 or 15 minutes. And Mr. Sonnenberg said that he would be the, yes, he's like, no, go ahead, Rick.
I did a real quick question. As I'm been listening to this, it sounds to me like we missed out by not having another category on the ballot for these funds. In other words, take off maybe 1% or 2% off of the capital and put it into an annually budgeted fund portion. And because you can't really look at them the same. One has a beginning, the other one has an end.
And one is always.
But this other one is repeating. So it doesn't sound to me like these should even be considered capital expenses. They should be categorized as something else.
For PPRTA 3, that's a wonderful suggestion. Thank you. I think it's a great idea.
I just want to clarify, or just, and to be short. So, based on the funding proposal that I presented here, where we fund the programs through the full 10 years, at this point, it looks like we might have about $45 million to go to B-list projects. When we get to the B-list, my thought or assumption is, if we go to the voters 22 or 23, and that gets approved, in funding for RTA 3 would start in 2025. So we would fund the programs through the 10 years currently, and then when we go to the B list, it's all projects. We're not going to ask for program money, because more than likely, well, in 2025, when the new funding starts, we will have programs in that category, so we won't need to take out of that $45 million. So that's why I thought hard. Do I really want to show, hey, we're funding this through 10 years? But I think we would like to request that, because all B-list projects, for the most part, are not going to be programmatic, because we should have a new funding source. And if we don't, then we'll have to figure some other way of funding it. So I just want to make that, because there's a question of where does the A list stop for programs, and B, I'm saying fund us through the 10 years at these levels, and then it's done.
All right, we are getting close to 5. Unless, Jim, you wanted me to cut it off.
No,
I thought you wanted to.
I would just like to, if, before you leave.
Jim, and then Rick apparently has something to say, and then I'll
Rick, go ahead.
close up.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Travis. Did you want to say anything, Jennifer? Not at all.
I may have missed it if Mike asked this question, so I'm asking the question on his behalf, and maybe for the 2020 budget cycle. On this sheet of paper, Mike is showing funding for program funds in 2020. I guess I'm asking on behalf of the CAC, is Mike not supposed to show those funds in his 2020 budget?
I think the cities and the county should submit the budgets that they want to CAC, and CAC should review it as CAC reviews it and make the presentation to the board, and then the board will deal with it. But that would be my recommendation. And I think that's the proper division of authority.
Yep.
Jim.
Okay, I would like to thank all of the council, the board
CAC
members.
Yes.
I would like to thank the board members for being here and engaging in this conversation. It's been good. It's been informative, and so it's been frank. And I think that the other CAC members who have not been part of some of the earlier discussions, this hopefully brings to light and opens up some of the concerns that we have. It's been a good, frank conversation. And I would like to say that we work for you guys. We report to you.
You work for the citizens.
We work for the citizens, but we report to you, and we're responsible to the citizens. And we take that charge very seriously. There's hardly a CAC meeting that doesn't go on that we don't bring up. The point is how are the citizens going to react to this, and how are we fulfilling their trust that they've put in us to be here and do that? And I can say that with an open mind, open heart, that we look at that very seriously. So we appreciate your time. I know you're all very busy. Dennis, you got to ride a long ways.
He gets to ride a long ways.
Yeah, take the back roads, yeah. But we want to thank you for your time and input and guidance to us. And if you have further guidance, please let us know.
Thank you. Rev?
Yeah,
And then Yolanda.
I wanted to say the same as Jim. Thank you very much for your time, board members and CAC. There are some issues that I think even now have questions about maintenance. But thank you all.
Yeah, and thank
And I
members of the CAC as well.
personally think it's an honor to serve. It's not an obligation. I mean, it's an obligation because I'm a citizen, but to me, serving on the PPRTA has always been an honor. Thank you.
Yolanda.
I just want to say the expertise in this room is amazing, and I'd never had the opportunity to listen to all of you, and I could just see how committed and how smart you are. I'm just blown away, and how little, I think we don't have that much on the board, but what you bring to the table, that's why we require, it's important to have the different boards and commissions that support whatever board we're on or whatever council or we're on. So I'm so overwhelmed and impressed with the work that you do and your commitment to this work. So thank you.
And I would echo that, and I'd also say this is not even a regular meeting, and you guys attended quite well. So thank you, and have a blessed rest of the day.
Oh, yeah, you know it.